You are listening to Transmigrating into the male supporting character's ex-wife on Galaxxy romance novel, where a transmigrator wakes up in the body of a discarded ex-wife. Ruan Jiu Jiu, once a cannon fodder in the novel, now opens her eyes in a world she doesn't recognize. Divorce papers are already on the table, but will she stay silent and endure, or fight to never be abandoned again? A tale of power, defiance, and a love both subtle and fierce begins right now. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss what's next. Let's dive in. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't purposely ignore Chung Jun. It's just that from the start she didn't consider him as an option for a companion. Thinking about it, she didn't have any friends and was all alone in this world, so at first she had thought about just reselling the companion ticket. But since it was a 3-day trip and you could only bring family members, you probably had to do all the included activities together. After carefully considering things, Ruan Jiu Jiu decided to go by herself. Chung Jun definitely wouldn't go with her. Ruan Jiu Jiu definitely didn't want to extend a hand, only for it to be slapped. So she simply eliminated this possibility. She happily made preparations for the trip and notified the representative from Dreamy Chat that she would be attending solo. Immediately afterwards, Ruan Jiu Jiu checked the local weather and specific locations. To her surprise, there was even a private beach. She happily went off to pack a bikini. Even though she was a landlubber, that didn't mean she couldn't soak up some sunshine on the beach. At this time, Ruan Jiu Jiu suddenly felt some regret. If only she had a friend to vacation with, she definitely would have been able to get some nice photos taken. In contrast to Ruan Jiu Jiu's extremely cheerful mood, Chung Jun, who was at the office today, seemed a bit more taciturn than normal. Those who had known him for a while and were familiar with his personality would know that right now, he wasn't in a good mood. The other people in the room were all a bit scatterbrained. Assuming that there was some issue with the game, they all bolted around in a panic to check for problems. Among them, only Tunan was clear on what the matter was. They were done for. The perfectly prepared ass-kissing not only didn't land properly on the ass, it even exploded in his face. He was also puzzled. Did the two of them get into a fight? Why wasn't sister-in-law bringing boss along to vacation? A tempest of tears raged in his heart. On the surface, he even appeared to be giving crappy advice. He silently walked to Chung Jun's side. The next moment, Tunan had a complicated expression on his face. He thought Chung Jun was busy working. He didn't expect to see a WeChat window open on his laptop. The contact name at the top was Ruan Jiu Jiu, and the chat was barren with not a single message. Ever since morning, Chung Jun had been in that position patiently waiting. Tunan didn't know how long Chung Jun had been staring at that screen without even moving a muscle. Tunan. Boss, did you guys fight? Chung Jun was still silent in his contemplation. Tunan coughed. What about this? I'll send another message to her and say that you also won a prize, and that you guys can go together. Chung Jun didn't say a word. His silhouette was faintly reflected on the screen. His eyes seemed to be staring off into the distance. Tunan shivered as if he had a bad premonition. The tempest of tears continued to rage. He was too impulsive. Why'd he think of doing such an idiotic thing? Tunan was in tears. I didn't know you were fighting with your wife. If I knew, I wouldn't have dug myself such a deep hole. If Ruan Jiu Jiu had heard Tunan's words, she probably would have laughed herself to death. Fight? Who could even fight with Chung Jun? If she fought, it'd be her loss. Nighttime. Ruan Jiu Jiu bought a heap of clothes for the trip and was currently stuffing them in the suitcase. She would be leaving in 3 days. She had to pack early lest she forgot something. Just as she was busy stuffing in towels, she suddenly felt a coldness from behind. Ruan Jiu Jiu? ? She subconsciously lifted her head and discovered that Chung Jun was standing to the side watching her pack. Chung Jun didn't have much of an expression on his face. He had a Yakult in one hand and slowly tore open the top. He calmly met her gaze. Ruan Jiu Jiu. You're free. Chung Jiu. Perfect timing. Can you help me tidy these few things? After saying this, Ruan Jiu Jiu suddenly realized that she hadn't told Chung Jun about the trip. Taking into account the flight there and back, she might be gone for 4 or 5 days. Chung Jun would have to figure out his meals himself. She suddenly had an epiphany. No wonder Chung Jun would be watching her in silence. He probably was confused. Oh right. I forgot to tell you something. Go on. Chungjun turned sideways to take a sip of the Yakult. His expression was very calm. He looked out of the corner of his eyes in Ruan Jiu Jiu's direction. He already knew what Ruan Jiu Jiu was going to say next. I won a prize and I'm going on a trip for a few days. You'll have to figure things out for yourself for a bit. Don't eat too much junk food. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't know why he seemed to be a bit unhappy. They had known each other for a while, and a tacit understanding developed between the two of them. Something suddenly clicked in her mind. She immediately understood what Chungjun was trying to get at. She thumped her chest. Don't you worry. Once I'm back I'll cook you a feast. I'll cook whatever you want to eat. Chungjun. Ruan Jiu Jiu saw his indifferent expression and was a little taken aback. She didn't know what else Chungjun wanted to hear. Chungjun slowly asked, just you? Yeah. How could there be another person? Ruan Jiu Jiu retorted in confidence. What, is there a problem? No. Then come help. There's a lot to do tonight. My hand is sore. Ruan Jiu Jiu? ? He turned and walked back to the study, closing the door. Ruan Jiu Jiu was left looking at the shut door with a confused expression. An hour hadn't even passed yet before the representative from Dreamy Chant sent her a few more messages. All the messages were trying to confirm whether she really would be going alone. It wasn't safe for a girl to travel alone, and they recommended that she bring a companion. The other party emphasized that this trip's highlights were the food and the scenery. They recommended that she bring someone who liked those two aspects. Once food was mentioned, Ruan Jiu Jiu immediately thought of Chungjun. She didn't know that all the messages were sent by Tu Nan, who was currently working overtime in the office and crying all the while. He was just one message away from begging Ruan Jiu Jiu to bring Chungjun along. If she didn't bring Chungjun, those few days would be hell on earth for them. Their boss was a workaholic and would definitely drag them into working overtime with him. He had originally planned to use his vacation to go on blind dates. He didn't want to be single anymore and have no one to love and no one to love him. Sister-in-law, wake up please. Ruan Jiu Jiu seemed to have realized something retrospectively. Was Chungjun unhappy because she didn't invite him along? Once this conclusion popped out in her mind, Ruan Jiu Jiu almost couldn't believe it. But Chungjun's expression did seem to be a little different than usual. Ruan Jiu Jiu silently walked to Chungjun's study and knocked on his door. Chungjun, have you gone to bed? I have something to say to you. As soon as she said that, the door swung open. Chungjun was wearing a blue checkered pajama top, and he looked a little tired. He looked down at Ruan Jiu Jiu and said, I'm going to bed. Speak quickly. Ruan Jiu Jiu. It'd be weird if she believed him. He hadn't even changed out of his pants. Going to bed my ass. Ruan Jiu Jiu leaned against the wall. She hugged her elbows and asked, about that trip. Did you want to go? Chungjun was just about to put his hand in his pocket and paused. You want to invite me? Ruan Jiu Jiu felt like he somehow had a hold of her. Yes. Chungjun sighed. I'd have to pack, and the flight would be so tiring, and the airplane seats would be so uncomfortable, and the food on the plane is so gross. Ruan Jiu Jiu's brows twitched. She cut him off. So are you coming or not? Coming. From the office, Tu Nan let out a cheer, exclaiming with tears practically rolling down his face. Thank God. Boss is going to go on vacation. We can finally let loose. By coincidence, Enro came in just as he was talking. The look on Enro's face was of faint disappointment. It used to be that at this time of day Chungjun would always be in the office, but these days Chungjun went home more and more often, and he left earlier and earlier. Hearing Tu Nan's words, Enro said somewhat doubtfully, he's taking time off? Chungjun actually would take time off? Tu Nan happily responded. Of course, he's going on vacation with sister-in-law. That resort is pretty good. They definitely have a good time. And in the meantime they could also sort out their marital issues. The smile on Enro's face froze slightly, but she immediately restored its usual warmth. Perfect, I haven't used my vacation days this year yet. I think I'll also head over for some fun. Tu Nan had a bad premonition. You mean? I'm going to that resort too. You can't, Enro, don't cause any trouble. What trouble? Don't we usually all work together? What's wrong with vacationing together too? There's no need for you to be so worried. Nan attempted to persuade her otherwise. What's the fun in third-wheeling them by yourself? And Ro replied, Jiao Fan will keep me company. Nan. What the hell? He was a bit mad but couldn't berate her. Nan tightened his brows. With a stern expression he said, You should know that the consequences may very well be your suspension. And Ro said, I joined just for Chungjun. How else would she have come back from overseas? The game in development had entered a new phase. As the head designer, Ro was in charge of a large majority of the crucial animation designs. There was no way she would be fired. She thought about it and decided to not hold back anymore. She'd either get what she wanted or leave. She'd have to act fast. Nan said, You'll be fired. And Ro locked eyes with him and said, I don't think so. If Chungjun really didn't have any feelings for her, then why didn't he kill her hopes and give her any signs of rejection after all the hints she had dropped? Only but how could Ro know that Chungjun's indifference stemmed from his complete lack of attention to her personal life? Nan said, You. He sighed. I hope you sober up. In Chungjun's eyes, there was no one who was irreplaceable and he had ways of turning the situation around. It seemed like at this rate, Ro would have to reap what she sowed. Nan hoped she could at the very least remember this lesson. Ro smiled. Am I that sort of person? Relax, I only want a little break. Thus, that night, Fan sleeplessly tossed and turned in bed. Thinking things over, he finally decided that it was better to tag along. He'd actually end up wasting his perfectly good vacation days on something like this. He was so pissed smoke was coming out his head, but at the same time he didn't know what to say. Nan quickly exchanged a few messages with Jiao Fan, agreeing on their joint vacation itinerary. The last to hear the news was Fu Zicheng. Stupefied, he immediately let out a wail. What? We're going on vacation. I don't want to see their PD- for the first time in her life. Ruan Jiu Jiu was sitting in first class. Immediately after boarding, she began to look around excitedly. Chungjun watched her stare at everything like a kid on their first trip to Disneyland. Even though he didn't know why Ruan Jiu Jiu was so happy, his mood also lifted. Ruan Jiu Jiu said in a whisper, Man, I've only ever sat in economy class. Pretty much every time they would be packed like sardines in a can. How could it compare to this? This was so spacious and with so few people that it was practically empty. If you wanted to stretch your legs, there was room. If you wanted to make yourself comfortable, you could settle right in. Even the in-flight meal tasted better than normal. But contrary to Ruan Jiu Jiu's expectations, Chungjun didn't have much of an appetite for the airplane food. What? You don't like it? Ruan Jiu Jiu's impression of Chungjun's stomach was of a massive garbage can. You could throw out pretty much anything in it. How was it possible for a guy to be this picky, if he could subsist entirely off of junk like instant noodles? Chungjun's response was as slow as ever. I've had it too often. Ruan Jiu Jiu said. Oh. Sorry, but she couldn't even imagine having such a problem. He finished off a bottle of yogurt and lazily reclined against the backrest, apparently without any intention of touching the nice, warm meal in front of him. Instead, it was Ruan Jiu Jiu that polished off the meal with relish. She was a little too embarrassed to ask for another one, not wanting to look like a bumpkin and be ridiculed by the flight attendants. But at the same time, one serving of the meal wasn't enough to satisfy her appetite. Ruan Jiu Jiu. Her gaze landed on the meal in front of Chungjun. Chungjun had probably fallen asleep. He sat there motionlessly, his eyelids shut tightly, breathing slowly in a measured pace. The past few days he had frequently gone out early in the morning, only returning late at night. The skin under his eyes was a bit dark, probably meaning he was sleep-deprived. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't have the guts to disturb him. She stealthily inched Chungjun's nice, warm meal set over, then quietly opened the lid, and finally she carefully scooped some food out for herself. Chungjun hadn't fallen asleep at all. He never slept on airplanes. He cracked his eyes open slightly and immediately was hit with the sight of Ruan Jiu Jiu stuffing herself with her head down like a hamster. The faint sound of his voice rang out. Weren't you on a diet? Ruan Jiu Jiu choked on her food and couldn't get a sound out. This bastard seemed to still be hung up on that time she ditched him to eat out by herself. Ruan Jiu Jiu said, What do you want to eat? I'll make it for you when we get back. 8 course. Ruan Jiu Jiu cut in. Pretend I didn't say anything. The estimated flight time was about 3 hours. Ruan Jiu Jiu ate and drank her fill, then happily put on her earphones to watch a movie. Unbeknownst to her at the same time, a few so-called travel companion buddies were sitting in economy. Fu Zicheng was still beside himself with fear. It's over, when the boss finds out about us we're finished. Tu Nan. You think I don't fucking know that already? Wasn't it for the sake of someone's marital issues? Tu Nan gloomily took a bite of his chicken, feeling extremely depressed. In order to conceal themselves they could only book economy class. The food was tasteless, but the worst thing was because he was the one among them with the most media exposure, he had no choice but to wear a huge pair of sunglasses. He couldn't reveal a single sliver of his face the entire trip to avoid discovery. A happy 3 days of vacation started just like that. Ruan Jiu Jiu arrived at the hotel before finally realizing something. She apparently forgot to ask how many rooms they had. Once the receptionist at the front desk raised one finger, Ruan Jiu Jiu realized how much trouble she was in. She asked, "Can we add a room? We'll pay out of pocket." "Sorry, there are restrictions on our reservations. All our rooms require VIP status members to book in advance." The receptionist lady nearly had her heart stolen away by Cheng Jun and her face flushed red. Ruan Jiu Jiu sighed. Okay. Thankfully it was a suite. They could just treat it like their place back home and sleep separately. Cheng Jun stood next to her, but his mind seemed to have already wandered past the heavens. Ruan Jiu Jiu dragged him towards the stairs. Once the two arrived at their suite, Cheng Jun looked at the living room with a thoughtful expression and didn't say anything. At this time Tu Nan and the rest had arrived at the hotel. They could only choose from the leftover rooms. The receptionist lady politely said, "Mister, the lady with the reservation asked for 2 rooms." Tu Nan's heart clenched. "Did you give her 2? "Of course not." The receptionist gave a professional smile. "When couples come to our resort, there's only 1 room available." "How clever." Tu Nan gave a thumbs up. "Mister, which room would you like?" "A room close to those 2. That way it'd be easier to have control over the situation." The 3 men took 1 suite and Enro took another for herself. The 3 forever alone bachelors were squished into 1 room. One was sitting on the carpet, beer in hand. They all sighed in unison. "What the hell was this?" Tu Nan said. "Enro worked alongside us for so long." Fu Zicheng nodded. "It's been almost 2 years. It's been so long. How does she still not know our boss's personality? I'm doing this for her, man." Upon thinking of the girl taking a misstep and inadvertently sending herself to death's door, he was about to explode from all the anger that had been building up. Only Jiao Fan was still a step behind. He suddenly yelped, "What? She likes our boss." The other 2 were speechless. What else could it be? No wonder he was single. At the same time, Ruan Jiu Jiu tidied up. She planned to change into a bikini. She excitedly fished out a camera from her suitcase and informed Cheng Jun, "In a bit, help me take some photos." When she turned back, Cheng Jun wasn't in sight. Ruan Jiu Jiu successfully caught him in the kitchen. Cheng Jun had drank a can of Coke and was currently sitting on the couch. Ruan Jiu Jiu said, "We'll be leaving soon." Now familiar with what this signified, he dug for some nuts and junk food in the drawers and slowly started munching. As expected, he had been munching for an hour or so before Ruan Jiu Jiu finally came out in her swimsuit and wrap. Her figure was really good. Her legs were slender and pale. She had curves and not an inch of her wasn't alluring. Anyone who called himself a man would be charmed. His gaze stopped on her snow-white skin for a split second. Ruan Jiu Jiu held her chin high. "I know I'm pretty. If you want to look, then look." Cheng Jun pointed at her tummy that had a bit of meat on it. "You're fat." Ruan Jiu Jiu. "Shut it." The setting sun was captivating. The ocean water was crystal clear. The sky met the water at the horizon, where the sun slowly set. All Ruan Jiu Jiu could think of was those supermodel photos on Instagram. She found a good angle and stood on the rocks. She lifted her beach wrap over her head and stared into the distance. It looked as if she were to drift away with her billowing wrap. This pose wasn't easy to hold. Ruan Jiu Jiu had no way of looking back. She raised her voice and asked Cheng Jun, "Got it. Emichim. Let me see the shot." Ruan Jiu Jiu excitedly scurried over and grabbed the camera. Her peach eyes, which had curved into happy crescents, instantly froze. The scenery was indeed beautiful. The water was plated in a glittering gold. Magnificent clouds dotted the far horizon. It looked as if it were heaven on earth. But Ruan Jiu Jiu searched high and low, then asked, "What about me?" "Here." Chengju pointed. When Ruan Jiu Jiu zoomed in, she finally found a dark figure standing on top of a rock. It was fine if she didn't notice, but noticing it actually pissed her off even more. At this angle, she practically looked like a seagull perched on top of the rocks. This could be considered the most unflattering angle possible. Ruan Jiu Jiu's expression was hard to describe. For a moment she was actually at a loss for words. There was a dark look on her face, and Ruan Jiu Jiu's death stare finally triggered Chongjun's survival instincts. Chongjun earnestly inquired, "Is it too zoomed out? What do you think?" She was beside herself. To be able to turn her into a seagull, she really had to hand it to Chongjun. Only this obtuse bonehead had the ability. In order to make up for his mistake, Chongjun took a new shot of Ruan Jiu Jiu. Ruan Jiu Jiu emphasized repeatedly that he had to find a good angle, and that he couldn't be too zoomed out. She wanted a dreamy feeling, as if she were one of those goddesses in the Mogeo cave murals, floating like a fairy. As Chongjun was trying to find the right angle, Ruan Jiu Jiu cast a backwards glance. She saw that he wasn't too far from her, and then continued to hold her pose, satisfied. After waiting a while, Ruan Jiu Jiu said, "Got it." Chongjun's tone was airy. "Beautiful. So artistic. Only Ruan Jiu Jiu?" She had a bad feeling. She jumped down from the rock and ran to Chongjun's side, taking the camera. She was thunderstruck. She almost didn't recognize herself. This time it was indeed zoomed in, that is, zoomed in to the point where it was practically an inch away from her body. The worst thing was that Chongjun still took this shot at an upward angle. In the photo, Ruan Jiu Jiu looked massive. She filled up the entire frame. With a sort of loftiness, her figure covered the sun and enveloped the sky. She blocked out the beach, sunset, and clouds. She could barely be called a goddess of the Mogeo caves. She was practically the heavenly dog swallowing the sun. This angle was so smooth-brained that Ruan Jiu Jiu was a breath away from strapping Chongjun to a rocket and launching him into the sun, never to return. Ruan Jiu Jiu grinded her teeth with a dark face. The perfectly fine fairy immortal was angered. "Have you heard of the case where the husband's corpse was found on the beach?" Chongjun quietly retreated a few steps and tried to change the topic. "I think it's almost dinner time." Ruan Jiu Jiu's unhappiness was written all over her face. This wind was a little chilly, so she abandoned her plans to take some nice pictures. She bundled up and decided to go back for dinner. She stomped forward, fuming. Chongjun was left in the dust. Not too long later came from behind the sound of Chongjun trying to ease the mood. "I took another picture for you." Ruan Jiu Jiu halted in her steps, skeptical. "Are you sure you didn't make me look like an idiot?" Chongjun offered the camera. "Definitely not." Ruan Jiu Jiu took the camera from his hands and cautiously took a look. She immediately sank into silence. She really shouldn't have had any expectations for Chongjun. This bastard somehow had the ability to make her look like a 1.2-meter tall munchkin. What skills! In the frame, a jacket rested on Ruan Jiu Jiu's shoulders, and she looked like a 1-meter dwarf. She even looked huffy, scowling with daggers in her eyes. She really didn't mean to roast herself, but she couldn't help but admit that she looked like a grumpy little pheasant with its feathers popped out in anger. Ruan Jiu Jiu. So is that what she looked like in Chongjun's eyes? She wanted to cry. At this time, Chongjun just had to chime in without any tact. "I'm so hungry." That night, under the subtle gaze of Ruan Jiu Jiu, Chongjun calmly polished off a mound of seafood. Ruan Jiu Jiu stared him down and stabbed her fork into her fried fish, as if it was Chongjun on her plate right now. She was full of regret. She thought that if she brought along a friend, she'd be able to take a whole roll of beautiful photos. But now, he was practically a warlord who had purposefully come to anger her to death. After she returned to their room and brushed her teeth, Ruan Jiu Jiu slammed the door in a huff and went to bed. She lay in a large, unfamiliar bed. After turning off the lights, the room became pitch black. The thick curtains were tightly drawn shut. The pillow was stuffed with something that had a fragrant smell, and the blankets were soft. As expected of a high-end resort, every aspect was wonderful. Only Ruan Jiu Jiu tossed and turned, not feeling sleepy at all. She opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling, and noticed that it reflected an indistinct black lump. It nearly scared the wits out of Ruan Jiu Jiu. She screamed and sprang up. Only after a long pause did she realize that she had been scared for nothing. What an annoying resort. Why did they stick a mirror on the ceiling? This wasn't some horror movie set. A knock came from the door, and Chungjun slowly asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Ruan Jiu Jiu turned on the bedside lamp in a cold sweat. She weakly said, "I was shocked by how good I look." She definitely wouldn't admit that she had been scared by her own reflection. That was too shameful. Chungjun. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't hear the sound of his footsteps departing. She was still unsettled. She turned over again but still couldn't sleep. She opened her eyes a crack and softly called out, "Chungjun, are you asleep?" A few seconds later he replied, "No." He was probably in the living room. His voice didn't sound too far off. For some reason, Ruan Jiu Jiu let out a sigh of relief and relaxed. "Good night," she mumbled. Her voice was almost a whisper, as if she were speaking to herself. All the lights were off and the living room was pitch black. The curtains were drawn, but by peering through a crack you could vaguely make out the tranquil seashore under the quiet night sky. It was a breathtaking sight. A slender figure leaned against the wall next to Ruan Jiu Jiu's door. His mouth moved yet no sound came out, but his lips read, "Good night." There were only pleasant dreams that night. The next day Ruan Jiu Jiu got ready in high spirits. She changed into an ocean blue maxi dress. Today she could lounge on the beach chairs and take a good nap. The sun's rays were particularly harsh today. Even Shiseido's highly rated Anessa sunscreen wouldn't be of much help. Ruan Jiu Jiu only wanted to peacefully lie on the beach chair and daydream. Chungjun and her reached a perfect consensus when it came to that idea. Compared to the two's relaxing excursion, the other group of people weren't as happy. Though they were said to be on vacation, there was still work to be done. The three men had their heads buried in their laptops as they scrambled. They relied on beer to fuel them as they worked the entire night. Two Nan sat on the carpet and sank into silence. And why did I want to send the boss here? It was because I wanted to have my vacation. So what the hell were they doing here? Fu Zicheng had tears streaming down his face. Fuck. My blind date fell through because I couldn't make the time. I hate you guys. And Ro changed into the bikini she had prepared. Every inch of skin it was possible for her to expose she exposed. It was a complete 180 from the innocent image she usually portrayed. Even Jiao Fan was a little stunned. She cheerily curved her lips and said, "Let's go. It's perfect weather for swimming." Under a beach umbrella, two people squinted their eyes as they ate fruit and took in the scenery. There wasn't a single soul on the beach. It was calm and leisurely. Ruan Jiu Jiu gave a lazy stretch. "Ah, this is so nice. I hope I can come here again." The sun, the sand, the waves, and the sound of someone munching on watermelon right next to her. Ruan Jiu Jiu's face darkened as she added, "Alone." At this time a few people walked over. Ruan Jiu Jiu was wearing sunglasses and couldn't see clearly. She squinted slightly. Beside her, Chungjun calmly wiped his hands. He wore a loose t-shirt and shorts. His exposed arms and legs unexpectedly weren't that flabby. One look and you could tell that he frequently exercised. Ruan Jiu Jiu had strong suspicions that behind her back, Chungjun worked out every day, while in front of her he pretended to be a fat shut-in. The group slowly walked closer and waved slightly in embarrassment. As they drew closer, Ruan Jiu Jiu recognized their faces and was shocked. Whoa, did Jiaqing's boss also come here on vacation? This was such a coincidence. Tu Nan and the others saw Ruan Jiu Jiu lazing on the beach chair from afar. Her snow-white skin was dazzling to the eye. Her slender legs were languidly crossed, and she had red polish on her toenails. She nearly took one's breath away. She was like a sleepy cat, but she was also like a bewitching siren. The vulgar cavemen all gave a dry cough and turned their heads, not daring to look any longer. Realizing that she currently looked a bit indecent, Ruan Jiu Jiu quickly sat up. Ladylike, she pulled the edge of her dress and covered up her slender white legs. Chungjun seemed to have long known that they would come. He continued to calmly munch on his fruit. Ruan Jiu Jiu quietly said to him, "Hey, Jiaqing's boss is here." As an employee, aren't you even going to say hi? The real CEO of Jiu calmly took a sip of coconut water and mumbled, he definitely wasn't the one who should be nervous. Upon seeing Chung Jun, the group of people were so nervous that they nearly called out boss, before they choked it back down their throats. Chung Jun only instructed them not to call him boss in front of Ruan Jiu Jiu, and not to call her sister-in-law, and didn't say much else. They couldn't figure out why, but they also didn't dare to ask further. What a coincidence! As the only one who wasn't in the know, Ruan Jiu Jiu warmly greeted the group. Indeed, indeed. Ruan Jiu Jiu asked, are you guys here on vacation? Yup. The group strained under the pressure. It was such a hot sunny day, but cold sweat somehow managed to form on their skin. Ruan Jiu Jiu. Did she have the wrong impression? Why did it seem like they were really nervous? Just as she was deep in her thoughts, a charming figure sashayed to the front. Her figure was very good. Having learned ballet for a few years as a child, her posture was excellent. She looked as elegant as a swan. She walked up to Ruan Jiu Jiu unprompted and smiled, saying, hello, my name is Enro. I'm an animation lead at Jiu. Enro had originally planned to establish her dominance. She stood while Ruan Jiu Jiu sat, cutting Ruan Jiu Jiu's grandeur in half. In Enro's mind, Ruan Jiu Jiu probably had a nasty look on her face and was guessing at the relationship between her and Chung Jun unexpectedly. When Ruan Jiu Jiu heard that she was an animator, she immediately clasped her hand and shook it vigorously. It was like an impoverished mountain-dwelling hobo meeting the head of a charity. Her eyes lit and a dazzling smile bloomed on her face. Nice to meet you. My name is Ruan Jiu Jiu. Please don't forget my name. Everyone. Enro. She panicked and quickly pulled her hand out of Ruan Jiu Jiu's grasp. For a moment she was at a bit of a loss and said, okay. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't expect to be able to have the opportunity to meet their animation lead. Once she thought of the possibility of working alongside Enro, she became even more enthusiastic. She noisily patted a beach chair next to her, indicating that Enro could sit next to her to chat. Enro was frightened out of a few brain cells and stumbled back. No. If she didn't know Ruan Jiu Jiu any better, she would have mistaken her for a lesbian. To Nan and the group. They originally thought Enro would stir things up, but now looking at things they probably overthought it. With a dark look on her face, Enro said, I'm going for a swim. After a pause she smiled warmly again and asked, do you want to come with me? Ruan Jiu Jiu shook her head. She didn't want to get tanned. Seeing her decline, Enro didn't push further. She turned and went for a swim in the sea. Jiao Fan also went to join in the fun. The remaining two people went to take a seat on some chairs a distance away. Ruan Jiu Jiu muttered under her breath that Jiaqing's boss was just friendly on the surface. In reality, he was another unapproachable big shot. She didn't insist, in case her overenthusiasm made them feel uncomfortable. Thus, Ruan Jiu Jiu continued to lounge on her chair. She silently watched Enro bob up and down, diving in and out of the ocean. With her lithe body she looked like a mermaid. She just so happened to be swimming in the spot right in front of Ruan Jiu Jiu and Chung Jun. Even an obtuse bonehead like Chung Jun would probably feel some urges, looking at that breathtaking sight. With that thought passing through her mind, Ruan Jiu Jiu turned her head. Oh, Chung Jun was actually asleep. She looked back at the horizon, where Enro was swimming back and forth with all her might. She couldn't help but feel, what a waste. Enro had a good physique and was able to swim for a while. Ruan Jiu Jiu was the only one watching Enro's beautiful swimming figure and cheering her on. Ruan Jiu Jiu was only a step away from outright clapping for her. Ruan Jiu Jiu wasn't an idiot. The girl was swimming to and fro, occasionally looking in their direction, and she clearly wasn't looking at her. She had probably fallen for Chung Jun. Ruan Jiu Jiu obviously wasn't worried. As long as she didn't get dragged into the mess, the two women could still happily be bosom friends. She had a contract marriage with Chung Jun, and they were actually both single. If someone wanted to pursue him, then go ahead. She didn't mind at all. Ruan Jiu Jiu already thought it through. If Enro wed Chung Jun, she'd already settled on the appropriate amount of cash to give them as a wedding gift from her position as a co-worker. If Enro knew Ruan Jiu Jiu was this chill about the matter, she'd probably secretly be angered to death. Finally, Enro became tired. She came ashore and gave a show of her beautiful body. Her swimsuit was soaked and clung tightly to her skin. In an alluring move, she sexily tossed her long, wet, black hair behind her back. Ruan Jiu Jiu had a blank expression. Ah! And Ro thought, given how bewitching she looked right now, even a woman would have to admit to her charms. Only Ruan Jiu Jiu continued. You didn't apply sunscreen today. And Ro raised her arm and found that it had indeed gotten a shade darker. It contrasted starkly against the white skin peeking out from the edges of her bikini. The tan was absolutely horrid. She didn't dare imagine how gloriously tan her face had become. After a moment of dead silence, and Ro truly couldn't hold herself back and wholeheartedly began sobbing. Ruan Jiu Jiu truly couldn't hold herself back and wholeheartedly snickered. Sorry, but you couldn't blame her for this. Once the laugh left Ruan Jiu Jiu's mouth, she felt that she had acted with impropriety. As a woman, she was very sympathetic to Ro. Even on cloudy days, she'd put on sunscreen before going out. She didn't even dare think of the consequences of being out in the sun for so long. She was afraid that Ro would have to hole up for a whole year before recovering. Seeing the girl's red eyes and hearing her sniffles, Ruan Jiu Jiu felt a bit sorry for her and went up to offer some consolation. Hearing her words of comfort, Ro started sobbing even harder. At dusk, Ro emerged from her room slathered in recently purchased after-sun lotion. She wore long sleeves, full-length pants, wide-brimmed sun hat, dark sunglasses, a face mask, and carried a parasol. Her entire body was wrapped securely. A barbecue had already been set up on the beach by the resort workers. Everyone could grill meat, drink beer, and relish in the breeze. It was as relaxing as can be. Only Ro seemed to have a dark cloud hanging above her head. She stood apart from the happy crowd. Jiao Fan didn't think a tan was that big of a deal, and completely forgetting about it, he ran off with the others to grab food. A few chefs were preparing barbecue condiments and charcoal. Out of the corner of their eye, they saw a beautiful lady in a long dress with a jacket on her shoulders. She was happily playing with the rocks on the beach. She looked innocent and adorable, and her black pupils twinkled like stars, brimming with a curiosity for everything. So wonderful. They paused in the middle of their work and couldn't help but take a few more looks. Then they saw the beautiful lady pick up a crab and burst into laughter. Chungjun, look. I caught it. Chungjun quietly retreated to safety. The crowd of onlookers. Oh. The crab was given a good scrub by the chefs and then marinated. Ruan Jiu Jiu had played to her heart's content. She collected many round little pebbles that had been weathered smooth by the ocean waves, and planned to find someplace to string them into a bracelet. Maybe that could be considered a handmade charm bracelet? When she turned, she nearly bumped into someone. Only when Ruan Jiu Jiu recovered her footing did she see that it was Ro. I have something to say to you. Ro was expressionless and had lost the tender demeanor she wore during the day. She looked straight on at Ruan Jiu Jiu. I don't care if you're playing the fool, or if you have some underlying confidence. All I have to say is that I'm determined to win Chungjun over. Ruan Jiu Jiu said. Sure. I'm not joking. I'm not joking either. Go do your own thing. We can still be friends, right? Ro. Ruan Jiu Jiu smiled and said, let me just put it this way. We don't have many special feelings for each other. If you want to be a homewrecker, then wreck away. There's no need to try to one-up me, since Chungjun even doesn't like me. Ro didn't expect such an answer. Ro didn't know if she would use the word like, but Chungjun definitely cared about Ruan Jiu Jiu. Upon seeing Ruan Jiu Jiu's demeanor, she could immediately tell who cared more. Ro was both jealous and couldn't put her hurt into words. In her heart, Chungjun was like an unattainable flower on the high mountains. Yet here he was single-sidedly protecting someone. She originally thought that Chungjun was someone who would only ever be on the receiving end of affection, and his icy stone heart would never melt. Ro didn't say anything. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought about it and didn't feel like she had said anything wrong. For a while, she really didn't know what the other was thinking. Ro bit her lips and said, I don't believe you'd be willing to let him go. How many men in the world could be like Chungjun? Ruan Jiu Jiu was puzzled. A wonderful girl like Ro didn't bother finding a tall, handsome, capable, not to mention high EQ man like Guyu. Why was she so hung up on someone as anger-inducing as Chungjun? With a heart full of good intentions, Ruan Jiu Jiu advised, why wouldn't I be willing? When it comes to guys, if the old don't go, the new don't come. When Ruan Jiu Jiu said this, Chongjun, Tunan and the others just so happened to walk by and they overheard everything. After hearing sister-in-law say that, the group silently looked towards their boss. The green hat on Chongjun's head was looking especially lush. Chongjun. Tunan coughed. Let's eat. He quickly prevented Ruan Jiu Jiu from saying anything else. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't seem to be the least bit embarrassed after having been caught. She cheerily went off to eat barbecue. The fresh, marinated meat was brushed with a layer of oil and when grilled over the charcoal fire, crackled merrily. The strong scent made Ruan Jiu Jiu's mouth water. And Ro sat dignified in her chair, not moving. Ruan Jiu Jiu walked past and jumped in. "You aren't eating?" She furrowed her brows in disgust and said, "I'm vegetarian. Sorry for bothering you." As a carnivore, Ruan Jiu Jiu really couldn't communicate with someone like Ro. Ro walked up to a red bucket and looked at the flailing fish inside. She tenderly said, "Let's not eat these fish. See how lively they look. Why don't we just release them?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was just loud enough for Chongjun, who was sitting nearby, to hear her clearly. Ruan Jiu Jiu resolutely refused. "No, I want to eat it. Aren't you being too cruel? Fish are also living creatures." Ruan Jiu Jiu. Every year, I participate in the Buddhist mercy release, and release many fish and turtles back into the wild. Ro flashed the photo on her phone in Ruan Jiu Jiu's face. "See? Look how big this turtle is. Who knows how old it is?" Ruan Jiu Jiu hesitated and asked, "Isn't this a pond slider turtle?" Pond sliders were an invasive species. They were ferocious omnivores and even dared to attack humans. Ruan Jiu Jiu already envisioned that the turtle she released had probably wiped out the entire population of fish in the pond. What sort of Buddhist mercy release was this? Ro was aware of pond sliders but didn't know what they looked like. Her face froze and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She could only cast a pleading glance at Chongjun. Then she helplessly saw Chongjun's eyes glitter as he pointed at the bucket of fish and said, "Cook them all." Ro. Weren't guys supposed to like kind-hearted girls who loved little animals? Tunan smiled awkwardly and dragged Ro away, hoping that she would give up and leave the two alone. Ruan Jiu Jiu returned to her seat. Seeing that the shrimp was done, she reached out with a greedy paw. But someone else beat her to it. Chongjun looked in her direction. Ruan Jiu Jiu was dumbfounded, still thinking that maybe he was getting it for her. She stretched out her hand and said, "Thanks, you fat ass." Under her eyes, she saw the grilled shrimp disappear into Chongjun's mouth. Apparently having burnt his tongue, he took a few quick breaths. He gave an evaluation with food bulging in his cheeks. "Pretty good." Ruan Jiu Jiu ground her teeth down another millimeter. She went to grab a grilled squid but Chongjun beat her to it again. His lanky arms easily reached past Ruan Jiu Jiu's to nab the grilled squid. This time he remembered to give it a quick blow before taking a bite. "Pretty good," Ruan Jiu Jiu said. "Excuse me, sir, do you want to die?" She lost all patience and reached out for a grilled oyster. This time Chongjun didn't block her. Ruan Jiu Jiu happily scooped it up. "Hot, hot, hot. Heh. I can hear you, thank you very much." Ruan Jiu Jiu once again felt the urge to strap him to a rocket on a one-way trip to the sun. She saw Chongjun's handsome yet languid face. He continued chewing without a care in the world. The more she looked at him, the angrier she became. Before Chongjun could even react, she leaned over, grabbed Chongjun's cheeks and gave them a good squeeze. The skin on Chongjun's face was thin and it quickly reddened after a few squeezes. Ruan Jiu Jiu took pleasure in his misfortune and said, "Steal again if you dare." Chongjun was suddenly shocked in place. The lady in his arms had a unique fragrant smell. Normally the smell was faint, but when she was in his embrace, he could distinctly smell it. Her hands were warm and her fingertips were still a bit hot from being scalded. They squished tightly against his cheeks. His heart seemed to have been scalded too. At this time Ruan Jiu Jiu saw her magnified face reflected in his eyes, and it took up over half his pupils. She was a little shocked. She suddenly realized that with her current position, she seemed as if she were cupping his face and going in for a kiss. The two stared at each other at a close distance. "Oh. You have something in your Iwedish." Ruan Jiu Jiu's face darkened. "Shut it." The people sitting opposite them saw everything clear as day. Tunan chugged some beer and asked, "And Ro, have you given up yet? Do you think boss would let you make such a move on him?" They weren't dumb. Though Chungjun looked a bit lackadaisical, as if he didn't care about anything, he still teased Ruan Jiu Jiu on purpose because of what she said, and for no other reason. And Ro pursed her lips tightly and didn't say a word. "It'd be better for you to admit your wrongs earlier. He may be holding himself back now, but that doesn't mean the boss permits you to do this." And Ro suddenly felt a bit heartsick. "I really don't understand where I'm worse than her. Why are all of you on her side? Are you all clinging to the belief that we have to protect the sanctity of marriage? What decade are we in? Don't we have the freedom to love who we want? How can you compare relationships between people that easily? And Ro, things aren't that simple." Jiao Fan, who had been sitting there quietly the entire time, suddenly said with a solemn look on his face, "There isn't any reason that can excuse interfering in someone's marriage. Don't ruin my impression of you." Ruan Jiu Jiu was already fast asleep, but Chung Jun remained standing outside, feeling the sea breeze on his face. His loose clothes rustled in the wind. A solitary figure stood on the soft, shifting sands. What was on his mind was a mystery. From behind, another figure gradually walked towards him. Unexpectedly, it was Ro. And Ro spoke quietly. "You don't have anything you want to say to me?" Chung Jun had a hand in his pocket, his back facing her. His tone was serene. "Don't use your position to gamble on things outside of work." "You mean?" Her face instantly paled. "Turn in your resignation letter." And Ro couldn't believe that Chung Jun would actually take the initiative to bring up resignation. She clenched her fist and said through gritted teeth, "There's no one who can replace my role if I leave. Make sure you've thought this through." Chung Jun finally turned around. In the darkness of the night, his pupils were pitch black. The degree of cold alienation in his eyes was something that Ruan Jiu Jiu had never seen herself. He was calm without a ripple in his voice. Regardless of how many tears Ro shed, he remained unmoved. No one is truly irreplaceable at their job. Therefore, assuming that the strength of your job title and work history gave you special privileges elsewhere was a big mistake. And Ro trembled all over. She thought back to what Tunan had said. "And Ro, you still don't truly understand Chung Jun." As it turns out, she truly didn't understand why he was able to act so lightly towards everything. And Ro wiped away her tears. Unresigned, she asked, "I only have one last question in your world. Will there ever be someone who is irreplaceable?" Under the darkness of the night sky, the man stood straight upright. His long and slender eyes glanced indifferently at the vast ocean. His voice seemed to disappear with the wind, submerging beneath the roar of the waves as they washed upon the shore. "I don't know." The next day, Ro's room was totally vacant. The only thing that remained was a letter of resignation. The people who had received the news were stunned. Jiao Fan quickly dialed her number but was stopped by Chung Jun. They didn't even know when he had come in. "No need. Boss, the work is half finished and you're just letting her go like that?" Emichim. When Chung Jun's words came out, no one had any room to retort. Tunan sighed and scratched his head, saying, "Then what should we do?" Chung Jun was very calm. "Aren't we already recruiting artists? Train them well. They'd quickly master their work. Recruiting computer graphics illustrators." Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Wasn't Ruan Jiu Jiu in first place? Achoo! Ruan Jiu Jiu sneezed and rubbed her nose. Only yesterday she didn't sleep that well. Her hair was a bird's nest. While brushing her hair with one hand, she picked up her phone in the other. She saw that there was a text from an unknown sender. The other party was piping mad and their text was filled with exclamation marks. "We can never be friends. Ruan Jiu Jiu." Very quickly she realized who that person is. Ruan Jiu Jiu had an innocent look on her face. This Ro sure was an interesting person. As Jiaqing's boss, Chung Jun was very fair. He left Ro one final bit of appearances, since after all, after being dismissed from Jiaqing, Ro would definitely be reassessed by industry insiders. Those not in the know all said that Ro had to leave the country because of some family issue. Before she left, the company paid her the rest of the year's salary, and bonus as compensation for all the work she had done for them. By the time Ruan Jiu Jiu heard about it, Ro had long ago caught a flight out of the country. Ruan Jiu Jiu was genuinely shocked. When she then got the news that Jiaqing wanted to hire her, she was both surprised and a little uncertain. The 3-day vacation concluded ahead of time. Because Jiaqing was in the middle of an important project, Ruan Jiu Jiu would probably have to start learning the ropes immediately when she got back and would be so busy she wouldn't have any time to rest. Sitting in the plane, Ruan Jiu Jiu shot a glance at Chung Jun, who was in the middle of eating some dragon fruit. She quietly called out his name. "Hey Chung Jun." Chung Jun gave her a look. "You're pretty high up on the ladder." When Enro and Chung Jun went head-to-head, Enro was actually forced to leave. Ruan Jiu Jiu genuinely felt that Jiaqing Corporation was really daring and a bit too firm. Chung Jun took a bite of dragon fruit and didn't respond. Being ignored, Ruan Jiu Jiu angrily sat up straight in her seat. She suddenly realized that she didn't know if Jiaqing's boss, Tu Nan, and the others were flying back. There wasn't a trace of them in the first-class cabins. They were probably still vacationing and had extended their stay. The 3 people on Ruan Jiu Jiu's mind were currently sitting in economy with heavy hearts. They had obviously wanted to fly first class, but they didn't dare do so. Their boss was currently fostering feelings with his wife. If they went over, wouldn't they be 3 massively conspicuous third wheels? Tu Nan looked at his chicken and rice and sighed for the 100th time. If it wasn't chicken and rice, it was fish and rice. Couldn't they come up with something new for once? A perfectly wonderful vacation ended just like that, without much fanfare. Oh! After returning home, Ruan Jiu Jiu pounced onto her huge bed and starfished, falling into the soft mattress. She firmly nuzzled her favorite blanket. Compared to the fancy hotel man, her own bed was still the best. Ruan Jiu Jiu's mood suddenly lifted. Tu Nan gave her 2 days to prepare. Once Ruan Jiu Jiu thought that these beautiful, halcyon days would soon be far behind her, she became a bit reluctant. But very quickly, she became happy and grateful that she could go work at a big company like Jiaqing Corporation. What was the first thing to do before starting work? Buy work clothes, duh. Ruan Jiu Jiu used work as an excuse to buy a few more nice outfits. Before, her wardrobe mostly revolved around casual wear. There weren't many office-appropriate pieces. Once the thought of shopping crossed her mind, she immediately regained her vigor. She was full of energy as she changed and put on some makeup, ready to go out. Chung Jun saw all this and suddenly thought, if she could work with such drive and energy, then even Jiaqing would be a stepping stone for her. When Ruan Jiu Jiu went out to shop, she also brought along the pebbles that she had collected. A boutique jewelry shop could shape and punch holes into the stone, but Ruan Jiu Jiu only wanted the holes. As for the shape, they looked perfectly fine as they were. By the end of the day, Ruan Jiu Jiu had shopped till she dropped. Her back hurt, her sides were sore, and her feet ached. She carried 10+ shopping bags and suddenly thought of the pebbles that she hadn't retrieved yet. By the time she returned to the shop, the boss had been waiting for a long while. He chuckled and said, "Miss, your pebbles are pretty good looking. I'll throw in some bracelet chains for you." Ruan Jiu Jiu held the bag of pebbles and hailed a taxi home with a satisfied heart. The taxi steadily drove forth. Ruan Jiu Jiu opened the bag and carefully sifted through the stones. Suddenly, a smooth black pebble drew her attention. The pebble was beautiful and made her immediately recall Chung Jun's languid pupils. When he looked at someone, his heart seemed as untainted as that pebble. Ruan Jiu Jiu decided to keep this pebble for him. Chung Jun was holed up in his study as usual. Ruan Jiu Jiu had eaten outside, but still traumatized, she didn't dare gorge herself on her own and specially took the initiative to bring him takeout. Feeling a bit sick of seafood after eating it constantly at the resort, Ruan Jiu Jiu bought him barbecue and rice and for dessert, some mixed fruit and sweet yogurt soup. She even included a few snacks. It was hard to fathom how such a weak and delicate-looking woman like Ruan Jiu Jiu managed to carry so much stuff back home. Ruan Jiu Jiu warned Chung Jun, "Don't you dare say scraping bye to me again." Chung Jun slowly made a noise of assent. As he was in the middle of eating, Ruan Jiu Jiu recalled something and went back to her room. She dug around in the bags and finally found that little black pebble. When she returned to the dining room, Chung Jun had finished eating his barbecue rice and was now leisurely savoring his fruit dessert. Ruan Jiu Jiu. This guy doesn't have 2 mouths, does he? For example, something like one in front and one on the back of his head. She stared helplessly, but didn't forget her original goal. Ruan Jiu Jiu sat down on the other side of the table and shook the pebble in front of Chung Jun's face, saying, "I have a gift for you." Chung Jun responded, "What is that? Take a guess." As Ruan Jiu Jiu stared encouragingly at him, he thought for a moment. Dung beetle ball? In the depths of the night, Ruan Jiu Jiu gave a fake laugh. "Why didn't you guess kidney stone?" With Chung Jun's remark, the perfectly good pebble did look a little like a dung beetle ball from afar. This was a bit awkward. Ruan Jiu Jiu's words were stuck in her throat. "Never mind, if you don't want it, I'll keep it." Chung Jun moved a smidgen faster than her. His arm was long and it easily snatched the pebble in her hands. He then stuffed it into his pocket and continued eating. "Ruan Jiu Jiu, I'll scrape by with this," he slowly remarked. Ruan Jiu Jiu. Some people really knew how to latch on to others' weaknesses. In her mind, a mini Ruan Jiu Jiu snatched Chung Jun's Yakult and gave him a good beating. Ruan Jiu Jiu would be going to work at Jiaqing, which meant that Chung Jun would have to minimize any possibility of running into her at the office. Tu Nan really didn't understand why this couple had to hide from and dodge each other. "You hide, I hide." In his forever alone bachelor mind, he mulled it over and concluded it was probably for amusement's sake. First day at work. Ruan Jiu Jiu finished applying a sophisticated makeup look and tied up her hair, revealing a pale, slender neck. She looked very enthusiastic and capable. Her pair of low heels clicked back and forth against the floor. After busying herself about an entire morning, she finally finished her preparations to leave the house. After a while, Chung Jun rubbed his temples and with a weary look on his face, walked out of the study. As he habitually took out a bottle of Yakult, his phone buzzed. Tu Nan had tagged him in the group chat. "Is sister-in-law here yet? Boss, what do I do? I'm so nervous." After finally getting back into the titled group chat, Tu Nan didn't dare let loose. He obediently awaited Ruan Jiu Jiu's arrival. "Jiao Fan, I would like to file a report that Tu Nan put mousse in his hair today." Fu Zicheng. "He's wearing his sexiest shirt." Jiao Fan. Fu Zicheng is wearing a new pair of shoes. Fu Zicheng. "Bro, are you stalking me? Fuck. There's only a single white stripe that's different from my old pair. How TF did you notice?" The group chat was in uproar. It quickly shot over 99 plus notifications. Chung Jun watched them kicking up a fuss, and didn't say anything in the chat. Only at the end did he think for a moment and message, "Don't give her any special treatment." Even though Ruan Jiu Jiu looked very happy-go-lucky on the surface, she was actually quite ambitious. It was impossible to keep things secret forever. If by any chance when she found out, she mistakenly believed that everything she worked for was awarded to her purely based on her background, that would be a seriously horrible feeling to have. Tu Nan didn't have time to reply before the front desk called, and said that Mrs. Ruan had arrived in the lobby. Rumors spread in the company, saying that some unknown person from God knows where had taken over in Rose's position. Everyone had a bucket of popcorn ready. But when Ruan Jiu Jiu stepped through the door, their eyes bulged. Were they recruiting animators or models? The company had always been a wolf den with not enough meat to go around. The programmers were so overjoyed that they nearly howled in delight. They all tried to sound out her background. For a moment, the excitement shook the entire office in a raucous din with no signs of quieting down. Ruan Jiu Jiu's boss was a seasoned employee who was a bit on the older side. He was a cute old uncle named Mr. Meng. His office was plastered in AI Hybrid posters. He had a very good personality and explained things with patience. Ruan Jiu Jiu was nervous at first, but slowly, she acclimated and started asking the occasional question. Tu Nan's heart wasn't in the work the whole entire day. He was waiting for Mr. Meng's evaluation. Just as Ruan Jiu Jiu was learning the ropes in the office, Mr. Meng stealthily slipped to Tu Nan's office and said, "I thought you guys just randomly picked someone off the streets and didn't bother recruiting. Her skills are pretty good." Tu Nan was suddenly overjoyed. "Can she do it?" "No problem. As long as she's willing to put in the work, she'll be trained in no time." Ruan Jiu Jiu had even more drive than they thought. On the first day of work, she stayed into the night learning. Tu Nan didn't dare leave before her. He still had to send her home in a taxi. With that thought, his heart sank. The couple were both workaholics. Would he even have a life now? His phone suddenly lit up. Chung Jun. "Still not done." Tu Nan quaked and replied, "I'll send her back soon." He didn't dare tell Chongjun that because Ruan Jiu Jiu stayed late today, more than half of their company's single men were excited into busting their ass to work overtime. Could be called a good thing. If they didn't have thoughts about the boss's wife, it'd be even better. Ruan Jiu Jiu was still preoccupied with looking at the design plans, which covered the game's backgrounds, its entire art style, up to the ancient style of the characters and their special characteristics. She carefully pored over the pages again and again, and with each repetition she gained more and more insight. Right at that moment someone knocked on the door. Ruan Jiu Jiu stretched. She thought it would be Mr. Meng, but unexpectedly it was Tu Nan. Your progress today has already been pretty good. Go home to get some rest, you can continue tomorrow. Chuckling, Tu Fan boasted. Your health is an asset. We're all about sustainable development here. Gotta make sure we don't burn ourselves out. Ruan Jiu Jiu nodded to show her understanding. Only then did she notice that her shoulders felt a bit stiff and sore. I've called a taxi for you. It's not convenient for women to go home by themselves so late. There's really no need. Don't worry, don't worry. There aren't that many women around here, so they're all carefully treasured. Especially sister-in-law, we can't let anything touch a single hair on your head. Only Ruan Jiu Jiu sighed in admiration. As expected of Jiaqing, they treat people so well. Tu Nan awkwardly smiled and was suddenly feeling a little guilty. A tune sounded. It was Tu Nan's phone. He didn't treat Ruan Jiu Jiu as an outsider and directly answered. Guyu. Hearing Guyu's name, Ruan Jiu Jiu's heart clenched. If she remembered correctly, it was around this time that Guyu experienced his life's greatest setback. On the other side of the phone, Guyu's heavy voice sounded. Sorry, I've hurt my hand. I can't compete anymore. Ruan Jiu Jiu remembered this plot detail because from beginning to end the entire novel was sweet and fluffy, with pretty much zero bumps in the road. There was only the brief section when the male lead encountered a setback. The author didn't actually go into much detail, but this made Ruan Jiu Jiu truly able to feel the male lead's pain. An esports player's career was short-lived, and those in the industry were often young. Though Guyu had the skills, he didn't have the luck. There were a couple times when he was about to finally hit success before unfortunately running into a wall, like Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. This time was the worst setback yet. If Ruan Jiu Jiu recalled correctly, Guyu happened to pass by a robbery and heroically jumped in. He ended up injuring his hand, and it would take at least a few months to heal. To him, this was none other than a disaster that had befallen an innocent Samaritan. Fortunately, the female lead Su Baiying stood by his side with words of encouragement. In his darkest moments, she gave him warmth and light. It was at then that Guyu truly fell in love with the female lead. What followed was a sudden reversal of luck. He quickly ascended in his career and married the female lead. After 2 lovey-dovey years of marriage, Guyu retired from esports and took a position behind the scenes, becoming one of Jiaqing's capable assistants. When Ruan Jiu Jiu had transmigrated, she had forgotten this detail. At that time, she had been pulling an all-nighter reading the book and only occupied herself with roasting the book's brain-dead logic and ridiculous views. Who knew that once she opened her eyes again, she found herself transmigrated into the book. Tu Nan's expression was very solemn. He expressed his understanding with an "mm," and then continued to ask Guyu what his current situation was. After telling him to relax and just properly recover, making sure not to injure his hand again, Tu Nan finally hung up. Sis, let's go. The driver is waiting in the garage for you. It just so happens that I'm able to send you back. Ruan Jiu Jiu silently sighed in her heart. No matter how problematic Su Baiying was, she still was the cure Guyu needed at this moment. Ruan Jiu Jiu could only hope that she would help Guyu quickly return to normal. Ruan Jiu Jiu followed behind Tu Nan. A few programmers they passed by stopped to stare with shiny eyes. But they very quickly realized that their CEO's expression was sterner than usual, and so they didn't dare act brashly. Thus, Ruan Jiu Jiu was able to return home without being harassed. She pushed open the door. The living room was dark and the lights weren't on. She guessed that Chongjun had probably gone to sleep. Ruan Jiu Jiu quietly changed her shoes and opened the lights. Suddenly, she yelped and staggered backwards. Why are you sitting on the sofa so quietly? She flustered. The first thing she had seen was a man dressed all in black sitting on the sofa. Ruan Jiu Jiu's hair stood on end and goosebumps popped out all over her. She had almost chucked a house slipper at him. Compared to her fright, Chung Jun was very calm. He lay against the sofa motionlessly, like a serene couch potato. His eyes weren't even closed as he stared straight ahead at the opposite wall like a puppet. Ruan Jiu Jiu ventured. "What are you doing? He'd really scare the wits out of people like that." Chung Jun's voice faintly floated over. "Fasting. Ruan Jiu Jiu? ? He continued in his faint voice. "I fasted a bit and fainted in hunger." Ruan Jiu Jiu really hoped that Chung Jun would fast successfully so he could ascend to the heavens to be an immortal. Master Chef Ruan Jiu Jiu successfully whipped up poached eggs and noodles, and brought the mortal Chung Jun back to life. She looked at Chung Jun eating his noodles and suddenly realized that ever since she started cooking, this bastard apparently lost all interest in junk food and started to spend all day waiting to be fed. This sort of "I don't even have to lift a finger in the goods will come" feeling was unacceptable. Ruan Jiu Jiu earnestly scolded. "You can't always expect me to cook. What if one day I'm not here anymore? You have to learn to take care of yourself. Later on there'd be too many unknown factors. Who knows? Maybe one day she'll open her eyes and discover that she returned to her original world. By then, Chung Jun wouldn't be able to find her even if he wanted to." When that thought crossed her mind, Ruan Jiu Jiu suddenly grew melancholic. She discovered that she was liking this world more and more. Chung Jun's motions of eating noodles paused for a moment. He unhurriedly said, "That won't happen." Ruan Jiu Jiu snapped back to reality and said, "Huh? What won't happen?" Chung Jun continued to bury his head in the bowl of noodles and didn't reply to her question. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought that sometimes she really couldn't tell what Chung Jun was thinking. She wasn't sure if he was just acting dumb or if he really was smart. His words always seemed to come out of nowhere. One day's work had thoroughly exhausted her. By the time she got home, Ruan Jiu Jiu already felt sleepy. Rubbing her eyes, she told Chung Jun to hurry up and eat faster so they could sleep earlier, and then went by herself to wash up in the bathroom. Before long, the splashing sound of water came out as the shower was turned on, and only then was the cold stillness of the house finally replaced with some liveliness. The next day, Ruan Jiu Jiu got up very early. Moving quietly, she quickly prepared 2 servings of food and arranged them into 2 separate lunchboxes. One was for her to take to work, and the other was placed into a conspicuous spot in the fridge. When she glanced up and noticed that she was already running late, she immediately rushed out the door to catch a taxi. At noon, when Chung Jun finished up his work in the study, he got up from his chair. He was still dressed in his pajamas. Slowly, with a feeling of fatigue, he turned and walked to the fridge and habitually took out a bottle of milk to drink. When he opened the fridge door, he was immediately struck by the sight of a neatly prepared meal. He slowly let out a sound of surprise and opened the lid. Inside, the container was stuffed to the brim with rice, veggies, and meat. There was even an extra egg for him sliced into halves. For the first time in his life, Chung Jun hesitated. Just at this time his phone buzzed. It was a WeChat message from Ruan Jiu Jiu. "Ruan Jiu Jiu, I forgot to tell you. Make absolutely sure that you heat the food up first in the microwave." He stared at his phone with his head lowered. Half of his face was blocked by the fridge door, so it wasn't clear what kind of look he had on his face. Oh, Ruan Jiu Jiu, who had just begun her working lifestyle, speedily adapted to the atmosphere of the company. Unlike other companies that had clear divisions between the ranks, Tu Nan and the other big bosses here were extremely friendly to Ruan Jiu Jiu. According to Tu Nan, when their company first started, it was just a few people who decided to collaborate together. It hadn't been long since their small company grew to the size it was today, so they still thought of themselves as ordinary employees. Plus, the bosses being so lively, engaging, and approachable was also because they were still so young. However, Ruan Jiu Jiu could clearly feel that they were extraordinarily interested in the boxed lunch she had in her hand. Oh, Ruan Jiu Jiu really wanted to cover her lunchbox as she ate. It really was odd. What food hadn't such a big boss eaten before, so why was he so interested in her lunchbox? Tu Nan really just wanted to experience sister-in-law's cooking skills, but he was too scared to say so. Anyone just walking by might think that he was taking advantage of her. He forced down the feelings of increasing restlessness in his heart and silently ate his curry rice, feeling extremely envious of the boss's dreamlike lifestyle. Just look at those artfully arranged colors. that attention to nutrition, that heartwarming little lunchbox. This was love that you couldn't feel from a meal made by a nutritionist or famous chef, no matter how carefully it was prepared. On this cold winter day, a single loner finally reached a heretofore unmatched level of misery. Under Ruan Jiu Jiu's blank stare, he paused in the middle of eating and inexplicably let out a deep sigh. How baffling. Lately work was really stressful. Luckily Ruan Jiu Jiu had a good foundation and her style just so happened to be in line with Jiaqing's. Moreover, she was willing to work overtime every day. Tu Nan was originally worrying over how to handle matters, but unexpectedly, Ruan Jiu Jiu turned out to be better than he had anticipated. Finally, he wouldn't have to worry about progress being delayed. Not bad, not bad. It looks pretty good. Tu Nan looked at the designs and his eyes sparkled. Without holding back, he praised Ruan Jiu Jiu for the 100th time. If you continue like this, there will be no problems. Ruan Jiu Jiu was a bit embarrassed by the praise. Out of her peripheral vision, she could see the crystal-clear blue skies through the window, and she suddenly thought of Guyu. Half a month had passed. She didn't know how the romantic plotline between the male and female lead had progressed in this time. This time, Su Baiying was feeling really wronged. From her last life till now, Guyu had never been so cold towards her. She had comforted and encouraged him, yet she didn't reap much results. This made Su Baiying doubt whether she had even done the right thing. She thought in her last life she took responsibilities for her actions, and in this life she would too. Since she had chosen Guyu, she would walk this path to the end and definitely not abandon it halfway. Guyu hadn't left home for a few days. Su Baiying was also out of her wits and didn't know how to proceed. Her thoughts were jumbled. Reports from her past life describing the story of Guyu's legendary ascent flashed in her mind. She definitely remembered correctly. In the past life, Guyu had suffered serious damage at this time. This was the start of his ascent. He was a golden nugget that would definitely shine. Jiaqing. It was a place like a dream. Only upon thinking of Jiaqing and that city in which she had stayed for a few years, Su Baiying thought of the face that had appeared in her dreams so many times, scaring her awake. After being reborn, Su Baiying vowed to never think about Chongjun again. This guy was nothing but a pretty face. Besides his looks, he was nothing. Comparing Guyu to him was like comparing heaven and earth. There was nothing for her to dwell on. But the more she thought about it, the more she recalled her past life's bitter memories. She thought, according to her past life's timeline, Chongjun should still be shacked up in that shoddy apartment of his that he couldn't sell off, wasting away. His money had been whisked away by his ex-wife and he lived a life with no future, alone. Su Baiying really wanted to see his sorry self. She suddenly felt a bit tempted. People have a tendency to compare themselves to others. After seeing Chongjun's destitute state, she'd feel all the more assured that her choice was the right one. Why not take a quick glance from afar? It'd help her cleanly cut off all hopes of her past life. It snowed for the first time this winter. Orange rays of light shot out from the boundless black sky and slowly, the world was lit. The wind was cold and chilled people to their bones. If it weren't for the empty fridge, Ruan Jiu Jiu wouldn't have stepped outside. She dragged Chongjun out the door. From what Ruan Jiu Jiu recalled, Chongjun hadn't left the house for a whole week. He had these days off yet still holed up at home as always as a shut-in. She really worried that one day he'd fall mentally ill from being holed up for so long. It just so happened that she needed a slave to carry things. Chongjun didn't plan to wear a jacket when they went out. He only wore a thin black sweatshirt. Seeing this, Ruan Jiu Jiu's face darkened. She grabbed a black puffer hanging from the coat rack near the door and put it on him. The puffer hung loose on her, but on Chongjun it fit nice and snug. Chongjun put his hand in his pocket and didn't seem to have any objections to wearing her jacket. He languidly followed after her. The two walked one after the other, and they drudged along at a slower pace than usual. Ruan Jiu Jiu carefully walked down the stairs. The snow had accumulated into a thick layer. Thankfully, she wore non-slip boots so she didn't need to be too cautious. Ruan Jiu Jiu took a few steps and urged Chongjun, "Be careful." Her foot slid out from under her and she lost control, falling down the stairs. She thumped her way down. It couldn't be a funnier sight. Ruan Jiu Jiu was dizzy from the relentless bumps her butt suffered. But it didn't actually hurt. Her thick puffer acted as a soft, proper cushion. It's just that the sight was a bit embarrassing. Ruan Jiu Jiu nervously looked left and right. No one had seen her embarrassing self. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. Then she heard a clear, short laugh from behind. Chungjun said, "Ha! Ruan Jiu Jiu. This bastard dared laughed at her?" She was pissed. She wanted to get up but her foot slipped once more and she landed on her butt. These so-called non-slip shoes were practically rollerblades at this point. They were slippery as can be. Ruan Jiu Jiu really wanted to give the store a low-ass review. Under her gaze she saw Chungjun easily saunter down the stairs. He spoke unhurriedly and had a puzzled look on his face. "Aren't we going?" Ruan Jiu Jiu said. "Help me up." "Oh." Holding onto his arm, Ruan Jiu Jiu slowly got to her feet and patted off the snow on her body. She originally wanted to chuck a few snowballs at Chungjun, but upon thinking how troublesome this guy was the last time he fell ill, Ruan Jiu Jiu nervously shook at the thought of him bringing up another full-course feast. She decided to focus on the errand at hand. Just as she was about to walk in the direction of the supermarket, she saw a figure out of the corner of her eye. It was a woman's figure. It was such a cold day and she wore a slightly thin windbreaker. Her hair was blown into a mess by the cold wind. It might have been the cold, but her pretty face seemed to frosted over and was ghastly pale. She stared in Ruan Jiu Jiu and Chungjun's direction without moving, lifeless and spiritless. Though it was rather inappropriate, Ruan Jiu Jiu thought of Mrs. Xiang Lin in the literature she was forced to read during high school. Mrs. Xiang Lin suffered a series of tragic misfortunes. There was a line about her that read, "The woman's pupils moved on occasion, proving she was at least alive." Ruan Jiu Jiu. Sorry, but the only other thing that came to her mind was Ameo, Mrs. Xiang Lin's son, who rather quickly perished. She had a strange premonition. Perhaps it was because of the woman's shocked gaze was too piercing, but only one name floated in Ruan Jiu Jiu's head. Su Baiying. Could it be Su Baiying? At such a critical time, she would actually run over to the neighboring city? Ruan Jiu Jiu really couldn't understand her way of thinking. Su Baiying stood at a place not too far away. Originally, she only wanted to take a look at that familiar window from downstairs. Pretty much every night, the window of Chungjun's study would be lit up. Back in those days it was like a signal light that guided her ignorant pure self towards it. Like a moth drawn to a flame, she stupidly lost herself in that cold, indifferent light. She had run over today in that exact frame of mind. She had thought that when she laid her eyes on that lonely window, she would finally be able to put her thoughts to rest. But instead, Su Baiying stared blankly as, against all expectations, Chungjun actually interacted with a woman. He even stretched out an arm to help support her up, obediently listening to her words like a big dog. The look in his eyes held a warmth that Su Baiying had never once felt when he looked at her. Su Baiying's world collapsed. She might not have been able to remember any other woman, but Ruan Jiu Jiu's appearance was something that, even if her bones ground to dust and her body turned to ash, Su Baiying would clearly remember. This sudden flash of recognition left her appalled. They actually didn't get divorced? It had been some time since she saw online that, earlier than she expected, Chung Corp was on the verge of bankruptcy. Su Baiying had buried a small seed of unease in her heart. Her biggest golden finger was that she had gone back in time. Without this golden finger she had nothing. She had secretly prayed inside that it was only small flap of the butterfly effect's wings. Now seeing the two's harmonious appearance, Su Baiying was suddenly struck dumb. If it was possible for Chung Corp to fail ahead of schedule, if it was possible for Chungjun not to get divorced, then it was also possible for Guyu to face a permanent setback and never see any possibility of changing his fortunes. The vision of a successful life that she had familiarized herself with was suddenly reduced into a flea, with no possibility of reprieve. A scary thought suddenly flashed through Su Baiying's mind. What if Guyu didn't get back up on his feet? What if he truly let himself go? Then what should she do? Guyu was currently in an awkward situation and faced great difficulties. Once Su Baiying imagined him submitting to fate and becoming an ordinary office worker. Her mood plummeted to the depths of the abyss. This was exacerbated when she saw that Ruan Jiu Jiu's simple clothes were actually all brand named. Her whole body was suffused with a lively spirit, and that she had a lovely, sweet demeanor. She clearly lived a life of comfort. But compared to her family's financial situation was this as a Gu Yu would sometimes send her gifts, but they weren't anything pricey. Su Baiying's heart grew a bit cold, so much so that she couldn't face Gu Yu and continue to treat him well. Cheng Jun stood at the bottom of the stairs and followed Ruan Jiu Jiu's gaze. Then immediately losing interest, he withdrew his sight. He slowly said, "Let's go." At this time they could still buy Odin Japanese fish cake stew from 24-hour convenience stores. Cheng Jun already decided what he wanted to eat. Ruan Jiu Jiu came back to reality and saw that the woman was frozen in place, which only confirmed her suspicions. That woman should be Su Baiying. From what Ruan Jiu Jiu recalled, Cheng Jun should have long already been divorced at this time. She didn't know what sort of feeling Su Baiying harbored when she saw her in that moment. Ruan Jiu Jiu was not afraid of Su Baiying. Su Baiying didn't have some godly red envelope group chat or some hidden pocket dimension. She didn't have a beautifying system or the opportunity to amass a harem. Her only option was to stick to Gu Yu like a daughter vine so as not to wither. Compared to her, Ruan Jiu Jiu had finished reading the novel and knew more of the plot. Let's go, let's go. It's freezing. They walked away and their figures slowly disappeared into the distance, but Su Baiying was still dazed. How should she continue to walk down this road? Oh! Ruan Jiu Jiu stuck a hand in her pocket and her mind was also somewhat adrift. After all, the male and female leads' moves always had a big impact. Next to her, Cheng Jun suddenly spoke. "Don't get close to her." Her. Ruan Jiu Jiu suddenly understood who Cheng Jun was referring to. Ruan Jiu Jiu asked, "You know her?" He shook his head. If Su Baiying heard his response, she'd be angered to death. She had dropped so many hints for Cheng Jun, yet he didn't even have an impression of her. Most importantly, Cheng Jun shook his head a little too earnestly. He wasn't even pretending to not know her. Ruan Jiu Jiu. If Su Baiying was still secretly in love with Cheng Jun, she'd probably die on the spot from anger. Upon thinking of this, curiosity suddenly struck Ruan Jiu Jiu. She nudged Cheng Jun's arm with her shoulder. "Hey, have you ever dated before?" Cheng Jun shot her a glance and didn't bother replying. Yet Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't let that slide and continued pressing. "What about a crush? You should have had that, right? If you've never loved, you've never experienced youth." Cheng Jun faintly asked. "You have." Ruan Jiu Jiu immediately donned a pair of starry eyes as she said, "When I was in college, there was this guy who had the best singing voice on campus. He was so cool. All the girls in his department had a crush on him." Hey, walk slower. Cheng Jun's pace suddenly quickened and Ruan Jiu Jiu promptly forgot the rest of her words. She quickly hurried to catch up. She was scared of the dark and definitely wouldn't let Cheng Jun out of her 2-meter radius. Cheng Jun's past was a mystery to her. She didn't know what he had gone through to develop into the person he was today. But Ruan Jiu Jiu could imagine that those memories weren't that pleasant. From the bits and scraps that she picked up from his stepmom Chu Wei, Ruan Jiu Jiu could approximately confirm that the only one Cheng Jun held in his heart was his mother who had passed away. She could already imagine that at school, Cheng Jun was bullied and envied by other guys because of his languid attitude. During lunchtime chatter, Tu Nan had inadvertently let a crucial detail slip. "I was classmates with Cheng Jun, high school classmates. I went abroad for uni but we still kept in touch." High school classmates? Ruan Jiu Jiu was shocked. "Then do you know what he was like in high school? Don't tell me he really was bullied." Tu Nan choked on what he was about to say. He looked at sister-in-law who was like a pure, white bunny and thought about it before burying the truth of the matter. Women were emotional creatures, loved weak, pitiful characters, and were the most easily moved by men. If sister-in-law treated their boss well, then his life would be a lot easier. Tu Nan followed that train of thought and said mournfully, "Of course he was. He was as pitiful as could be. His life sure wasn't easy. Wasn't easy, my ass. Who didn't know of such a godly figure?" Tu Nan continued, "There's going to be an alumni reunion soon to celebrate the construction of a new building. We're all planning to attend. Bobi Bro Cheng Jun will probably also come." After high school, Cheng Jun's lifestyle descended more and more into depravity even though clearly, it used to have some human warmth. Watching him, Tu Nan was worried. And then sensing the glacial speed with which the relationship between these two progressed, he couldn't help but fret on their behalf. He only hoped that Ruan Jiu Jiu could understand Cheng Jun better, and help make it easier for Cheng Jun come out of his shell. Only Tu Nan's sob story triggered an overflow of Ruan Jiu Jiu's compassion. Ruan Jiu Jiu returned home and looked at Chung Jun, who was sitting on the sofa. Suddenly she became very careful. She patted his shoulder and tenderly asked, "What do you want to eat? Was today tiring? Want to have a heart-to-heart?" Chung Jun was silent for a moment and then suddenly stood. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought he was touched. Unexpectedly, he walked in a familiar direction and took out a familiar-looking thermometer. Chung Jun said, "Come measure." In the early morning, Ruan Jiu Jiu woke up early for work. She prepared 2 bentos, putting one in her lunchbox. The other, she waited for to cool before putting it in the fridge. At some point when she wasn't paying attention, Chung Jun emerged from his study. He wearily rubbed his eyes. With a hand in his pocket, he walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of Yakult. His gaze followed Ruan Jiu Jiu as she bustled around, moving from the cutting board on the left to the bentos on the right. He seemed incomparably at ease. Ruan Jiu Jiu looked out of the corner of her eye at the extremely idle Chung Jun. She suddenly grew depressed. She always had this feeling that she was the breadwinning hubby who tirelessly rose early and returned late, and Chung Jun was the pampered wife who ate his fill, drank his fill, and spent all their money. Ruan Jiu Jiu. But spending money to support such a good-looking man like Chung Jun really wasn't a loss. If only his EQ were a bit higher. Upon thinking of her dung beetle Balba, her black pebble, an old hatred welled up inside her and she shot him a glare. Chung Jun innocently looked at her, and didn't understand where her fury came from so early in the morning. "I'm going to work. Be good and wait at home for me." Chung Jun was very obedient. "Okay." He watched as Ruan Jiu Jiu put on her shoes and walked out with a spring in her step. The door slammed shut and the house suddenly fell into a deathly stillness. Chung Jun's lonely figure sat on the dining table chair. He suddenly realized that hiding his identity wasn't that good of an idea. Once again, the house would be empty for the entire day. Chung Jun took a sip of Yakult and lowered his eyes. His eyelashes were long and thick. After a long while, a light sigh slipped from his lips. So cold. He should have let the Yakult sit out for a bit. Oh. Ruan Jiu Jiu took the taxi as usual to work. She had never learned how to drive. Lately, because getting to work was such a headache, Ruan Jiu Jiu couldn't help but consider whether she should get her license and buy a car. Before, she didn't get her license because she was afraid of car accidents. But now she had thought it through. Her life was in fate's hands. It wasn't up to her to decide how long she would live. Today she left a bit late and there was traffic on the road. Even though the taxi driver pulled out all the stops to try to come up with a detour to avoid the traffic jam, he still couldn't get Ruan Jiu Jiu to work on time. Ruan Jiu Jiu gave Mr. Meng a heads up ahead of time. She definitely would be running late and getting her pay docked was only right. Mr. Meng had a very good attitude. He sent a voice text, telling Ruan Jiu Jiu with a chuckle not to hurry. If in her rush she didn't eat breakfast, then she should grab a bite before coming. Ruan Jiu Jiu. The company management really was too nice. By the time she got off the taxi and was rushing towards the office, Ruan Jiu Jiu was half running and no longer cared about appearances. She rounded the corner of a building. Jiaqing's offices weren't much further. She carried a lunchbox in one hand and her shoes thudded on the ground. Then she almost bumped into someone. Ruan Jiu Jiu promptly apologized. Sorry. The other person first let out a yelp and then immediately after she grabbed a hold of Ruan Jiu Jiu in disbelief. How could you be here? It was unexpectedly Su Baiying. This path was in Jiaqing's direction. Su Baiying instantly turned pale with fright. She didn't understand how Ruan Jiu Jiu could enter a company like Jiaqing. Ruan Jiu Jiu was puzzled. Why can't I be here? Su Baiying's hands were icy and her grip was tight. Ruan Jiu Jiu had to use all her strength to shake her hand off. She furrowed her brows. She really didn't like Su Baiying's impolite behavior. I'm about to be late for work. Please step aside. Work. Su Baiying found that even harder to believe. You? Work. The idea that someone like Ruan Jiu Jiu could work at Jiaqing was the biggest joke ever. From the start, Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't want to pay her any heed. But from Su Baiying's perspective, this entirely looked like she had something on her conscience and didn't want to admit anything. Su Baiying coldly laughed. No wonder you changed your style. So you used your looks to get in. At first Ruan Jiu Jiu was taken aback. But then she found it laughable and ridiculous. Then at the thought that Su Baiying's words were an acknowledgement of how pretty she looked, Ruan Jiu Jiu was no longer annoyed. It wasn't that long ago when Ruan Jiu Jiu yearned for the day when someone could curse her out like that. You think that just because you're rich, you're all that. You think that just because you're pretty, you're all that. Ruan Jiu Jiu expressed that she was indeed all that. She gave an insincere smile. Yep, I used my looks to get in. How about you give it a go? This hot mama is the sexiest beast under the heavens. Ruan Jiu Jiu was just that shameless. Su Baiying took her joking words seriously. She ground her teeth. I'm not inferior to you. In her last life, she had constantly quietly compared herself to Ruan Jiu Jiu. Su Baiying happily concluded that although she couldn't best her in the looks department, she still had her character and skills. Ruan Jiu Jiu was a pretty face with a horrid personality. She was an idiot who couldn't match up. But now, the feeling of disparity between them made Su Baiying incomparably resentful. Su Baiying looked on helplessly as she saw Ruan Jiu Jiu pass her, looking refined from every possible angle. She looked on helplessly as Ruan Jiu Jiu confidently walked through Jiaqing's doors. Even the security guard was very cordial with her. Then she disappeared into a place Su Baiying could never lay a foot in. Without even realizing it, her hands had clenched tightly into fists. This was the first time Su Baiying was jealous of Ruan Jiu Jiu. In order to latch onto Guyu's thigh, no means were below her. It was all to see Guyu enter Jiaqing one day and commence his glorious career. But now, Ruan Jiu Jiu's flippant attitude was a little hard for Su Baiying swallow. Su Baiying was beside herself as she returned home. She invited Guyu to meet up with her. She sat in the cafe and looked at Guyu, who was looking a bit haggard. His right hand was still bound in gauze and he had a bruise on his chin. His beard wasn't shaven clean and there was even a small cut if you looked closely. He didn't look the least bit like a hero in his sorry state. He was like a setting sun about to sink into the icy ocean, never to see the light of day again. Su Baiying clenched her fist. You Gij, I hope you can pull yourself together. Guyu flattened his lips and blinked. Thanks. His low spirits broke her heart. His negative emotions tightly encircled her, making it hard for her to breathe. More and more, she doubted whether Guyu would really be able to reverse his fortunes. After all, their huge differences between this life and her previous life had cropped up. Moreover, she had smothered any opportunity for his future wife to appear while it was still in the cradle. A single flap of the butterfly's wing was able to change many things. Su Baiying fixed her gaze on him and spoke steadily. If you continue like this, even I might give up on you. Guyu blinked once, totally aloof. Su Baiying was angered by his calm indifference. She didn't hold back and let her mouth run away from her a bit. Fine, very well then. If you want to be trash, then go ahead. You can stay like this for your whole life. I really misjudged you and thought you could succeed. One slip of the tongue, and Su Baiying immediately regretted it. Because the childhood friend she had known for over 10 years was no longer looking at her with that tender, loving gaze he always used. His eyes finally lost all trace of the last remaining bit of leniency he had. He stared at her as if staring at a stranger. Guyu said, if you want to invest, then apologies. This stock has dropped beyond the daily limit and halted trading. There won't be any more miracles. Su Baiying's back suddenly grew cold. She immediately began to stammer, trying to explain herself. No, that's not what I meant. Guyu looked at her with abnormally cold eyes and threw down a sentence. The one with only fame and success isn't the real me. It's best that you find someone else. Once he dropped that line, he turned and strode out without even turning back. Oh, time flew by. In the blink of an eye, another 2 weeks passed. Ruan Jiu Jiu slowly became acclimated to the work life, and she began to enjoy it. Besides the employees who attempted to hit on her at every opportunity, everything else flowed very smoothly. Ruan Jiu Jiu happily calculated her salary and how much time she'd worked. Her mind wandered as she thought of her future as a rich little lady. If she wanted to get married, then she would. If not, then she'd just date around. This was the life of her dreams. Lately, Tunan was away on business trips and she only had Mr. Meng left to chat with. Mr. Meng was an uncle who lived in the 2D world. Once the topic turned to the history and development of manga, he could get extremely eloquent and well-spoken. One time he bragged that there was a time when he didn't wash his hands for a week because those hands shook the hands of Hayao Miyazaki, so he couldn't bear to wash them. Ruan Jiu Jiu. When she thought of the fact that Mr. Meng was a guy, and that when guys went to the toilet, sorry, she'll excuse herself. Suddenly, Mr. Meng became some unkempt old uncle in her mind. Mr. Meng complained about the anime adaptation. He ranted saying that he didn't want to see any romance between AI Hybera and Conan. Ruan Jiu Jiu's brain grew numb as she listened. Using the excuse of wanting to go out on a walk to stretch her legs, she managed to avoid Mr. Meng's brainwashing. There was still a lot of work to be done in the afternoon. Ruan Jiu Jiu wanted to just get some vitamin D before returning to work. Outside, the sun shone at just the right angle. Ruan Jiu Jiu had to squint her eyes. Unexpectedly, she saw a familiar shadow. To her surprise, it was Guyu. He stood outside the main entrance, his body looking a bit frail. He had a blank expression on his face and didn't seem to notice Ruan Jiu Jiu's existence. Ruan Jiu Jiu was a bit shocked. Strange, were those two people on watch in rotating shifts? Why'd another one show up after the first one left? Both standing dumbly in front of Jiaqing's doors. Ruan Jiu Jiu walked up. Guyu. Guyu's vacant expression suddenly focused. He straightened his posture and turned his head, discovering Ruan Jiu Jiu with a resplendent smile across her face. He didn't know when she appeared next to him. You are. Oh. Ruan Jiu Jiu pointed at the building behind her. I work here. Creative department. The answer was a bit out of his expectations, but his expression quickly relaxed. When they were recruiting computer graphics illustrators, entrant number 233 placed first. That was you. You somehow remember? I'm honored. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought Guyu had regained his spirits and thought things through. She smiled as she looked at him. What about it? Want to go in? It's just that the CO2 Nan isn't here today. Guyu fell into silence. Only today he had planned to give Jiaqing one last glance before bidding this absurd yet disappointing part of his life goodbye. But now that Ruan Jiu Jiu was smiling, speaking in such an easygoing manner, he couldn't say anything. She thought that he was resilient. He originally thought so too. Looking at Ruan Jiu Jiu's high-spirited manner, Guyu thought of List. What sort of steel determination did that man possess? As for himself, he was only 20-something and already planned to give up on his meaning of life. It was so embarrassing he couldn't even say it. What is it? Ruan Jiu Jiu asked. Nothing. His voice was a bit hoarse and wasn't as tender and easy on the ears as usual. But when he lifted his head once more, there was another layer of meaning it in. I won't give up. Guyu repeated, as if swearing to himself. After saying that line, Guyu immediately left. Ruan Jiu Jiu felt like he was different than before. Perhaps he had suffered through the vicissitudes of life, and his vibrant, unhurried nature now had a dash of steadiness. In that sense, it was a good thing for him. During dinner, Ruan Jiu Jiu sat across from Chungjun as they chatted. They amicably played out their roles as husband and wife living their daily lives. Ruan Jiu Jiu said, once I get paid, I'll treat you to a feast. This was mutual reciprocation. Ruan Jiu Jiu expressed that she had to be kind and honest as a person. Chungjun knew very clear how much she earned. After all, he set her salary. Chungjun lowered his head to drink his soup. He slowly said, okay. Oh right. Ruan Jiu Jiu said, I feel like I need to learn how to drive, or else it'll be too inconvenient to get to and from work. Take a taxi. His words were cut off as Ruan Jiu Jiu explained in more detail. Though I have money, it won't be there forever and I have to save a bit on the cab fares. Moreover, sometimes she might not even be able to hail a ride. The only other option is to hire a chauffeur. But do you think I can afford it every month? It's impossible. Chungjun blinked. Actually, it was possible. Even if she wanted to be sent to work in a motorcade, that was still doable. It's just that he couldn't say those words aloud. She was swamped with work these days and couldn't squeeze out any time to attend driving lessons. The sun set earlier in winter time, and practicing alone at night was a little dangerous. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought perhaps she could do warm-ups like find some game where she could practice her driving. Oh. Ruan Jiu Jiu sat on the sofa with a grave expression on her face as she looked at her phone. If someone didn't know better, they'd think that something major had occurred. Her back was as straight as an arrow and she kept reciting the basics of reversing a car. Step by step, she nervously continued to make progress. Chung Jun walked by and cast her a glance. He fell into a weird silence. He stared blankly as Ruan Jiu Jiu drove a sedan in a battle royale game. She slowly turned, stopped, turned back, and then stopped again. Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't have her mic on, but her teammates did. "Miss, what are you doing? WTF? Why the hell did you have to run all the way over here to practice your driving? I really have to give it to you. Last time I saw a girl treating PUBG as some dress-up game, but now there's someone practicing their driving? If you want to learn driving, then go play kart, man." Ruan Jiu Jiu, who still hadn't turned her mic on, was stunned. She suddenly realized that what they said made sense. "Jiu Jiu Jiu, thanks for the tip." She then drove into a wall and committed suicide. Her teammates. Thus, 10 minutes later, Ruan Jiu Jiu's character appeared in kart. Everyone else followed the map and rushed forward. But not her. One of the players silently reversed, like someone who had gotten stuck at the starting line. She didn't reverse very far before being sent back to the start. Ruan Jiu Jiu expressed that she was someone with patience and determination. Because of this, she almost didn't wake up the next day. Dark circles hung under her eyes, and her whole body exuded a feeling of exhaustion. She swore to never again try to prove herself via a game. Last night she practiced and then started to play. She played and played until the sky turned bright. Ruan Jiu Jiu was left sluggish and lifeless. Her only wish was to collapse onto bed and have a good rest. She yawned. Mr. Meng was a little shocked and said, "I always felt like you were a little out of place in the company, but now I finally feel like I found a point you have in common with us." Ruan Jiu Jiu asked, "What point?" "Eyebags." Mr. Meng was very good-natured as he said, "So as I was saying, if you're looking for a partner, you definitely have to look for a programmer. They earn lots of money and die young. Remember to stack on the life insurance, haha." Ruan Jiu Jiu was left speechless. She was amused and shook her head, saying, "My husband isn't a programmer." There was still a large gap between an esports player and a programmer. Every day, Chung Jun was living his beautiful, leisurely, sedentary life. How could he be overworked to death? Choking to death or eating himself to death was more like it. Mr. Meng smiled mysteriously along with her. He thought Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't want to bring up Chung Jun in case people said she was here because of connections. Mr. Meng said, Okay. If you say he isn't, then he isn't." Ruan Jiu Jiu. Why did it feel like the two of them were talking about entirely different things? "Oh right, boss 2 came back today, but he's meeting someone at this moment." Ruan Jiu Jiu flipped through the documents and absent-mindedly asked, "Who?" "I think it was, what's he called? Guyu?" "He went to ask Tu Nan for a meeting. It's probably something to do with the esports team." The sign-up period had already passed and the preliminaries had concluded. He didn't know if he'd be given the opportunity to join in the middle of the competition. This plot point matched up with what Ruan Jiu Jiu recalled. She remembered that Tu Nan did give him a chance. Though Guyu encountered some trouble at the competition, he succeeded in the end in a brilliant display of skill without slipping up. Finally, he was able to successfully rise to unseen heights. Seems like Su Baiying had come in handy at this critical time. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought though Su Baiying as a person wasn't much, she was still able to assist Guyu through one of his hardest moments. Their feelings would be fostered through sharing these trials and tribulations. Guyu definitely wouldn't treat her unfairly. Ruan Jiu Jiu hoped that Su Baiying would be able to appreciate all that she had and not fixate on Chung Jun anymore. Using a somewhat inappropriate metaphor, the way Su Baiying looked at Chung Jun was like a fierce dog looking at a meat bun, minus the pouncing. Ruan Jiu Jiu felt a little disgusted at that thought. On the other side, after the talks with Tu Nan concluded, a figure walked out from the office. Surprisingly, it was Guyu. Tu Nan's assistant was by his side and just so happened to be able to accompany him for a bit to see him out the door. Guyu took a few steps and then suddenly asked, "Where is your animation design department?" The assistant said, "It's 1 floor down." "What is it?" "Nothing." He gave a slight smile. Upon thinking that the person was already married, his expression suddenly dimmed. "I know someone there." By the time Ruan Jiu Jiu returned home, the sky was already dark. Chung Jun was in his study and didn't come out. So Ruan Jiu Jiu took the opportunity to change out of her work clothes. She comfortably lazed against the soft sofa. Her head rested against the cushion as she peeled oranges. She bounced her legs back and forth as she propped them up, seemingly in high spirits. When Chung Jun opened the study door, he saw Ruan Jiu Jiu's unbecoming image. Normally, when she was in public, she was very dignified and well-mannered towards others. But at home she sprawled out and lay recumbent, doing the Beijing slouch. Ruan Jiu Jiu looked up and greeted him. "Yo, good evening." "Yeah." Chung Jun sat on an armchair to the side. Ruan Jiu Jiu was peeling her orange when curiosity suddenly overtook her. "What do you think of Gu Yu's skills?" There wasn't any suspense in his duel with Chung Jun, so Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't have any idea of his strength. Chung Jun cast her a glance and clearly didn't seem too interested in replying. "Okay." An okay from him was already very convincing praise. Ruan Jiu Jiu let out a sigh of relief. "Then I wish him success." From Ruan Jiu Jiu's words, Chung Jun knew she was aware that Gu Yu would continue to participate in the recruitment tournament. As for the specifics of how she received the news or what went on between the two of them, Chung Jun had no way of knowing. It just so happened that Ruan Jiu Jiu looked very happy at this moment, as if her good mood today was because of Gu Yu. She spoke of Gu Yu and her mood was affected by Gu Yu. She was too lazy to care for Chung Jun's past yet took the initiative to mention Gu Yu's name, just to understand his skills. Gu Yu, Gu Yu, Gu Yu. Everything was Gu Yu. Chung Jun's languid, scattered gaze finally looked a little different. At this moment he didn't even want to see Ruan Jiu Jiu's smiling face. It was a little unpleasant to the eye. He suddenly stood up and walked to his study. Behind him, Ruan Jiu Jiu was a little shocked and asked, "Hey, aren't you eating? What's wrong with you?" The only reply Ruan Jiu Jiu received was the closing of the door. What was wrong with him? Just those lowly, laughable feelings that arose in his heart, and that he couldn't control. Ruan Jiu Jiu thought that he was just in some weird, baffling mood. Unexpectedly, he didn't come out even after quite some time had passed. Ruan Jiu Jiu also got a bit mad. She returned to her room in a huff and also closed the door. She wanted to show Chung Jun that she too was unhappy. Ruan Jiu Jiu lay on her bed browsing her phone. She planned to reconcile with Chung Jun after a while. But she waited and waited, but there still was no sound. She lay on her bed and fell asleep without even realizing it. When she woke up in a daze she realized how famished she was. Ruan Jiu Jiu quietly opened the door, and discovered that the door to Chung Jun's study was still shut tight. She angrily shut her own door and decided to not cook dinner tonight, and to let Chung Jun starve too. Her stomach grumbled and she couldn't help but rub her flat, deflated tummy. Ruan Jiu Jiu. In silence she opened Mate One, a delivery platform, and decided to have herself a good meal. She threw down the big bucks and ordered spicy crayfish, seafood boil and meat skewers. Ruan Jiu Jiu already started salivating. Just when she was about to press pay, she thought that if she ordered takeout, Chung Jun would definitely notice. By then, there was a good possibility Chung Jun would once again relegate this to that vile solo dining issue. Thus, Ruan Jiu Jiu had a brilliant idea. In the space for delivery instructions she wrote, "Please don't come through the front door and instead go under the windows on the south side. There will be a rope hanging down. Please remember to knot the food tightly." Ruan Jiu Jiu happily pressed pay. Ruan Jiu Jiu took a page out of those TV dramas and tightly knotted 2 bedsheets end to end into a thick rope. She then patiently waited for the food delivery guy to deliver the goods. The food delivery guy, Mr. Lee, was very dumbfounded. He looked at the note a few times before confirming the other party's weird delivery method. The patron said they would tip well for the trouble. He gritted his teeth and rode his scooter to the other side of the building. In the pitch dark and eerily silent night he was like a thief, tiptoeing with a bag of takeout. He went to the side of the building and confirmed the location. A window opened and a makeshift rope fell down. It shook in the direction of the food delivery guy. Only he didn't understand why he had to do it like this, but nevertheless he still did it. Mr. Lee did as the patron wished and knotted it tightly so that the bag wouldn't slip. He busied himself until he practically had a head full of sweat. Finally he finished and was able to take a breather. He looked up, waiting for the patron to haul it up. Then, Mr. Lee watched as the other window opened. In the window adjacent to the one with the rope, a man stood there with a faint gaze, looking at the makeshift rope hanging out the next door window. Food delivery guy. Should he say anything or not? The winter winds were chilly. Ruan Jiu Jiu froze and shivered from the cold air that blew in from the window crack. Her nose was a bit itchy. She almost sneezed before holding it in. She didn't want Chongjun to discover that she had ordered takeout, so it was better to be on the cautious side. With that thought, she proceeded more carefully. Right now, Ruan Jiu Jiu was completely oblivious to the fact that a few meters away, a certain person's death stare was currently locked onto her movements, which she thought had gone unnoticed. Grumble. Her stomach let out an impatient growl. Ruan Jiu Jiu swallowed her saliva. She could already imagine the beautiful life ahead of her, eating spicy crayfish while watching her soap operas. She patiently waited another moment. The food delivery guy at the bottom of the building still didn't shake the makeshift rope, indicating that it was ready to be hauled up, but she could already feel a weight at the end. Oh, strange, was it ready or not? Ruan Jiu Jiu clutched the makeshift rope with one hand as she popped the window open halfway. The bone-chilling wind was no longer hindered and suddenly poured in. It nearly froze her face solid. She shrunk her neck and regretted not bundling up in a jacket. Hearing nothing from Chongjun's side, Ruan Jiu Jiu sneakily stuck her head out the window. The food delivery guy downstairs stupidly stood in place. He was still torn over whether to tell her or not. He still had a sense of ethics in his line of work. What if he didn't say anything and the tip disappeared? What then? From Ruan Jiu Jiu's angle, she could only see the food delivery guy planted in place, seemingly looking up at her. Ruan Jiu Jiu gave him an okay sign. She gave the makeshift rope a tug and discovered that he had knotted it pretty tight. Thus she decided to slowly haul it in, one hand over the other. Her movements were very slow as she tried to draw the bag in at a steady pace in hopes that it would successfully reach its destination. It was kind of heavy. The next moment, Ruan Jiu Jiu was dumbstruck. The takeout was stuck at the balcony railing below. Oh! Ruan Jiu Jiu's face flushed red as she stuck out her arms, hoping to yank the takeout out of place. The takeout container was heavy. Ruan Jiu Jiu was exhausted and sweating, and her arms tremored. In that moment, she was very depressed. Why did it take so much effort just to eat a meal? The food delivery guy quickly hopped on his scooter and slipped away. In the dark night, his yellow figure absconded particularly fast. He disappeared in just a few seconds. Ruan Jiu Jiu's phone suddenly sounded. It was a phone call. She was scared the ringing would disturb Chongjun. With one hand, she gripped the makeshift rope, and with the other she answered. Hello. Ruan Jiu Jiu spoke in a whisper. Relax, I'll tip you in a bit. No, it's not about the tip. I work with an honest heart. Mr. Li's voice was very cool-headed. Madam, out of my own conscience, I recommend that you put your head out the window and look to the window to your east. I can only help you this far. If the fates allow, see you again. Beep beep beep. The other party hung up. Ruan Jiu Jiu. In confusion, she followed the food delivery guy's instructions and peeped out her window, looking at the window to the left of her. Then, the two locked eyes, staring at each other like one of those scenes straight out of a drama. She didn't know how long Chongjun had been standing in front of the window. He looked at her with a faint gaze that reminded her of the way he looked at her in that restaurant when they awkwardly bumped into each other. Ruan Jiu Jiu was shocked. Her grip subconsciously loosened and the hefty takeout container plummeted, taking the makeshift rope with it. Ruan Jiu Jiu came to her senses and scrambled to save it. She reached out her arm trying to grab the makeshift rope that was slithering down. Unfortunately, she was too late. Ruan Jiu Jiu looked on helplessly as the takeout container tragically tumbled. With a thud, it dropped onto the lawn, exploded into a mess, and started leaking from the plastic bag. Seeing this scene, Ruan Jiu Jiu helplessly clutched her head. She nearly let out a sob. Her takeout, her money, her crayfish, they were all gone. Oh! 10 minutes later, Ruan Jiu Jiu was bundled up in a thick black puffer as she dejectedly walked down the stairs with a drooped head. Chongjun was behind her, and the whole way down the two didn't exchange a word, making Ruan Jiu Jiu feel a bit awkward. She opened her flashlight. She shined it on the lawn and easily found the tragic crime scene. Chongjun had an empty bag and a roll of paper. He had come with Ruan Jiu Jiu to mop up the scene. Ruan Jiu Jiu couldn't go to sleep with the mess just laying out there. After all, the lawn was a public space. Ruan Jiu Jiu grew even more dejected. Who would chuck $200 worth of trash on the lawn? Could she be even more useless? The two scooched over to where the crayfish were and crouched down, both speechless. To lighten the mood, Ruan Jiu Jiu joked, I heard that if food falls on the ground you still have a few seconds to eat it. We've only been here for a few minutes. Do you think we can ha? Hearing Ruan Jiu Jiu's words, Chung Jun, who was crouched silently next to her, sunk into thought. He fixed his gaze on the cold crayfish laying on the lawn. Oh, Ruan Jiu Jiu said. Stop. You can't eat it. Chung Jun took the initiative to finish mopping up the crime scene. He wore nylon gloves, swept all the remnants into the bag, and wiped the place down with paper towels. Ruan Jiu Jiu stood to the side with her phone flashlight lighting the area. Chung Jun didn't say a peep throughout the process. He picked up one especially large crayfish in dead silence. Ruan Jiu Jiu lowered her head. Sorry. He then picked up the icy cold skewers in dead silence. Ruan Jiu Jiu's head hung a centimeter lower. Sorry. If secretly ordering takeout and being discovered was awkward, then Chung Jun picking up each and every piece of evidence of her solo feast, in front of her face, was practically death by 1,000 cuts. Ruan Jiu Jiu nearly burst into tears. God! She vowed to never eat anything behind his back. Ruan Jiu Jiu drooped her head and dejectedly asked, How did you know that I bought takeout? She was starting to suspect that Chung Jun had a nose like the heavenly dog from Chinese mythology, and could catch a whiff of anything from 1,000 miles away. Chung Jun calmly said, I just happened to open the window for air. Ruan Jiu Jiu. Her luck was remarkable. In truth, Chung Jun had been standing in front of the window in a daze. He had been standing there ever since she went to bed, surveying the barren, empty ground. It was only when he saw a food delivery guy walk toward their building that he quietly opened the window. Then, he saw the adjacent window open a crack and rope being flung out. Ruan Jiu Jiu sighed. Her stomach then grumbled and her face reddened. Chung Jun stood. He carried the trash without a trace of disgust and went off first. The chilly wind carried his cool voice back to her. Come on, let's do a little scraping by. Ruan Jiu Jiu knew she was in the wrong and could only pretend not to hear. As expected, Chung Jun's scraping by wasn't really scraping by. The two sat in a private room at a Jianghu cuisine restaurant and ordered a table full of dishes. There was spicy crayfish and meat skewers. The colors looked enticing, and the aroma assailed the nostrils. One look and saliva would start forming. Ruan Jiu Jiu tended her own affairs as she peeled the bright red crayfish. She stuffed her face till oil was dripping out of her mouth. It was so spicy that she was huffing, and soon her face flushed red. As she was chowing down, Ruan Jiu Jiu suddenly thought of the reason behind today's silent treatment. She gloomily asked, What was up with you today? Why did you suddenly ignore me? Hearing this, Chung Jun's paused amidst peeling the crayfish. Personal reasons. It had nothing to do with you. Sorry. What's wrong? If there's anything that's making you unhappy, I'll help you out a bit. Ruan Jiu Jiu chuckled as she scooched closer. It'll definitely help resolve your unhappiness. Chung Jun slowly said, Will it make me happier than eating alone? Ruan Jiu Jiu. Are you still unhappy? Chung Jun didn't want to say anything, and Ruan Jiu Jiu didn't know what to do with him. She might as well leave it at that, and ate minding her own business. It was perfectly harmonious this way. Ruan Jiu Jiu was stuffed and reclined against her seat, not wanting to move an inch. She worriedly asked, Will I get fat if I continue eating like this? Chung Jun unhurriedly reasoned out. You burn 1,200 calories as a baseline. If you don't exercise, then your metabolism will be even lower. At night, you even consume carbs and foods high in oil and fat. Not only will you get fat, you will wanna die. Ruan Jiu Jiu coldly laughed and cut him off. Women only want to hear one thing at this time. You definitely won't get fat. Chung Jun, who had been forced into silence, wanted to express that women only liked hearing lies that would hurt them. Oh! Chung Jun paid the bill. With her hands stuffed in her pockets, Ruan Jiu Jiu waited behind him. The two stunning looks turned many heads in the restaurant. Even the person at the till was very courteous, taking 33% off their bill, and giving them a VIP card in hopes they would return. Ruan Jiu Jiu pulled up her puffer's hoodie, hoping to hide part of her face. Thankfully Chung Jun was quick and they quickly left after paying. It was pitch dark outside and Ruan Jiu Jiu was so cold she shivered. She followed in Chungjun's footsteps in the direction of their home. The two didn't walk very far before a car brushed by, almost veering off the road and onto the sidewalk. Everything happened so fast she didn't even have time to be alarmed before a strong force tightly gripped her and dragged her back. She staggered to the side a few steps. Thankfully, Chungjun held steady, or else she would have taken a devastating fall. Then her head bumped into his chest. Chungjun pressed his hand down, stabilizing her flailing head, and asked, "Are you hurt?" He lowered his head and the distance between the two suddenly closed. Under the faint lights, his eyelashes fluttered like a crow's feathers. His lowered gaze fixed on Ruan Jiu Jiu, and his eyes weren't as placid as usual. His pupils were exceedingly black. The inky darkness that permeated the night stained them, such that Ruan Jiu Jiu was unable to make out the intensity held within his eyes. She wasn't hurt the least bit. Chungjun reacted quickly when the car was still a distance away. In her sluggish state, Ruan Jiu Jiu finally experienced what post-traumatic stress was like. Her small face was a ghastly white. "Nothing, let's go home," she said. Chungjun didn't let go. He dragged Ruan Jiu Jiu by the arm as they headed home. They walked rather quickly, and Ruan Jiu Jiu couldn't help but scuttle along. Chungjun seemed to have noticed that she was unable to keep pace. He purposely slowed his footsteps so she could keep up. Ruan Jiu Jiu felt like Chungjun was very attractive when he became serious. His stunning beauty in that moment even made her waver. The two were silent on the way back. There was only the sound of their shoes stepping on the ground. Ruan Jiu Jiu wasn't uncomfortable being pulled by the arm. She walked a few steps and quietly said, "Thanks." Though he was only her husband in name, he was still pretty reliable. "Only of him," Chungjun lightly said. He wore a long black puffer. He was tall and lanky, only leaving Ruan Jiu Jiu a glimpse of his languid side profile. It was as if he was unmoved by Ruan Jiu Jiu's word of thanks, giving him a cool attitude. Ruan Jiu Jiu shot him a glance and then another. Ruan Jiu Jiu was a bit hesitant. "Why are you walking with your arms and legs together like a penguin?" "Chungjun," Ruan Jiu Jiu said, "you're dead, really dead." The story has begun. Stay tuned to see how Ruan Jiu Jiu takes control of her fate. If you enjoyed this preview, don't forget to like, share, subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's next.